Alara Winslow stepped off that dusty Wyoming stagecoach expecting to meet the cultured gentleman who'd written her poetry and promises, only to find a sun-scorched cowboy with grief in his eyes and devastating news. Her intended husband was dead. Stranded 2,000 miles from Boston with nothing but a trunk of useless silk dresses, she faced an impossible choice: accept charity from a stranger who clearly didn't want her there, or perish in a land that devoured the unprepared. This is the story of how a refined lady and a broken rancher found something neither expected in the unforgiving West. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Alara Winslow against the wooden seat with enough force to rattle her carefully pinned hair. Dust billowed through the windows in choking clouds, coating her navy traveling dress, the finest she owned, in a film of grit that seemed to symbolize everything about this godforsaken territory. Through the haze, she caught her first glimpse of Broken Creek, Wyoming, and her heart sank like a stone dropped in deep water. This wasn't the civilized frontier town Thomas Dalton had described in his letters. Where were the neat storefronts he'd mentioned, the library he'd promised to show her, the gardens where they'd take evening strolls? Instead, she saw a collection of weather-beaten buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together by men too tired to care about right angles. A saloon leaned precariously to one side. The general store's sign hung by a single nail. Even the church, and there was only one, seemed to be losing a battle with the persistent Wyoming wind. "Broken Creek!" the driver shouted, his voice rough as sandpaper. 10-minute stop for them continuing north. Everyone else, this is your final destination, and may God have mercy on your souls. That last part was muttered, but Alara heard it clearly enough. Her fellow passengers, a mining engineer and two rough-looking men who'd spent the entire journey playing cards and spitting tobacco, gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency. They belonged to this harsh landscape. She was as out of place as an orchid in a desert. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her skirts, trying to reclaim some dignity after 3 days of relentless travel. She'd left Boston a week ago, boarding a train with her head full of romantic notions about frontier life. Thomas's letters had painted such a vivid picture: a ranch house with real glass windows, a piano in the parlor, a man who appreciated literature and intelligent conversation. He'd quoted Wordsworth in one letter, Thoreau in another. He'd seemed like a miracle, a gentleman scholar who happened to live out west, seeking a wife of refined sensibilities to share his civilized outpost. Now, staring at the desolate main street of Broken Creek, those letters felt like cruel fiction. "Miss, you getting out or staying on?" The driver's weathered face appeared at the window, his patience clearly thin. Yes, I'm getting out." Alara forced steel into her voice, the same tone her mother had used when dealing with difficult servants. She was a Winslow. Winslows didn't show weakness, even when they were terrified. The driver helped her down, his grip surprisingly gentle for such rough hands. Her boots, delicate things made for Boston's paved streets, touched Wyoming dirt for the first time, and she felt the earth itself reject her. This land didn't want her any more than she wanted to be here. "Your trunk, miss." He deposited her leather-bound trunk beside her with a heavy thump, then pointed toward a covered wooden walkway. "Might want to wait in the shade. This sun's murder on fair skin like yours." Before she could thank him, he was back on the coach, snapping reins. The horses lurched forward, and within seconds the stagecoach was disappearing in a cloud of dust, heading north toward destinations unknown. Alara watched it go with a sensation very close to panic. She was alone. Thomas was supposed to meet her here. That had been arranged weeks ago through carefully coordinated letters. Her last telegram, sent from Denver, had confirmed her arrival date. He'd promised to be here, waiting with a buckboard wagon to carry her the remaining 12 miles to his ranch. The sun beat down with an intensity Boston had never prepared her for. Even in the shade, sweat began to trace uncomfortable paths down her spine. Her corset, which had seemed perfectly reasonable in Massachusetts, now felt like an instrument of torture. Around her, Broken Creek conducted its business with complete indifference to her presence. A woman in a faded calico dress swept the porch of what might have been a boarding house. Two cowboys led their horses toward the saloon, their spurs jingling. A Chinese man pushed a laundry cart down the street, his face carefully neutral. No one looked at her with anything resembling welcome. Alara pulled Thomas's most recent letter from her reticule, unfolding it for perhaps the 100th time. His handwriting was elegant, each letter carefully formed. My dearest Miss Winslow, by the time you read this, mere days will separate us from our first meeting. I confess I count each hour with an eagerness that would embarrass me if you were here to witness it. The ranch house is prepared for your arrival. I've had the guest room fitted with new curtains, and Mrs. Chen from town has helped me select items I hope will make you comfortable. Broken Creek may seem rough at first glance, but I promise you'll find culture here. We have a lending library, and several families who appreciate good conversation and music. You won't miss Boston as much as you fear. I'll be waiting at the depot, the man with the brown Stetson and probably the widest smile in Wyoming. Until that blessed day, I remain your devoted correspondent, Thomas Dalton. The paper was soft from repeated readings, the creases worn almost through. She'd memorized every word during the long journey, clinging to them like a lifeline. Thomas seemed too good to be true. A successful rancher with a love of books, a man who'd lost his own wife to childbirth 3 years prior, and finally felt ready to open his heart again. Their correspondence had spanned 6 months, long enough for Alara to convince herself this wasn't madness. Except Thomas wasn't here. You look lost, miss. Alara spun around, heart hammering. A woman stood in the doorway of the general store, middle-aged, solid as oak, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. I'm waiting for someone, Alara said, hating how her voice wavered. Mr. Thomas Dalton. Do you know him? Something flickered across the woman's face. Pity, maybe, or concern. I know the Daltons. Come inside, child. That sun will cook you alive, and whatever you're waiting for, you might as well do it somewhere cooler. The general store smelled of leather, tobacco, and something sweet Alara couldn't identify. It was blessedly dim after the brutal sunlight. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, proprietress, busied herself behind a counter laden with everything from ammunition to canned peaches. Thomas Dalton, you said? Mrs. Patterson's hands stilled on a bolt of fabric. You're the mail-order bride. It wasn't a question. Alara's cheeks burned. The term sounded so mercenary, so desperate. We've been corresponding. We have an understanding. Oh, honey. Mrs. Patterson's face softened with unmistakable sympathy. Nobody told you? Cold dread wrapped around Alara's chest, squeezing until she could barely breathe. Told me what? Thomas died. 3 months back, maybe 4. Horse threw him, broke his neck. Was dead before he hit the ground, they said. Merciful, at least. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Alara's feet. She groped for something to steady herself, found the edge of a barrel. No, that's not possible. I received a letter from him just... She frantically calculated dates. 6 weeks ago. Mail's slow out here, miss. Sometimes letters travel for months before reaching their destination. And sometimes... Mrs. Patterson trailed off, uncomfortable. Sometimes men have friends or family who don't want to waste the price of a telegram on bad news for strangers. The word strangers hit like a slap. That's what she was here. A stranger. Not a grieving fiancé, not even a proper widow, just a foolish Boston girl who'd bet everything on letters from a dead man. Alara's mind raced uselessly, finding no purchase. I should return home. The next stagecoach won't come through for 3 days, and then you'd need money for passage. Mrs. Patterson's voice was gentle but unflinching. Do you have money, miss? Alara's hand went automatically to her reticule. She had $12 and some change, enough to survive perhaps a week if she was careful, nowhere near enough to get back to Boston. And even if she could get there, what then? She'd sold almost everything to finance this journey. Her aunt had made it painfully clear there was no place for an unmarried niece in her household. Alara's own parents were 5 years dead, their modest fortune consumed by her father's medical bills, and her mother's subsequent decline. Coming west hadn't been romantic adventure. It had been desperate necessity dressed up in hopeful letters. I see. Alara forced herself to straighten, to meet Mrs. Patterson's eyes with what remained of her dignity. Then I'll need to find employment. Do people here need governesses? Or perhaps a teacher? Mrs. Patterson opened her mouth to respond, but the words never came. The store's door swung open with enough force to set the bell jangling violently. A man filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the blazing afternoon sun. As he stepped inside, Ilara's breath caught. He was nothing like Thomas's description of himself. This man was rawness personified, all hard angles and coiled strength, like violence barely contained in human form. Dust covered him from head to foot, so thick it was impossible to tell what color his shirt had originally been. His hat was battered beyond redemption, his boots scraped and stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Dark hair fell past his collar, shaggy and unkempt. Several days' worth of stubble shadowed a jaw that could have been carved from granite, but it was his eyes that held her frozen. Dark as midnight, they swept the store with an intensity that made Ilara feel exposed, dissected, found wanting in a single glance. When those eyes landed on her, she felt the assessment like a physical touch. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice rough as creek stones. "This her?" "Reeves." Mrs. Patterson moved from behind the counter, positioning herself slightly between Ilara and the newcomer. "I was just telling Miss Winslow about Thomas." He cut her off, not rudely, but with the efficiency of a man who had no time for gentle approaches. "I know. That's why I'm here." "You're—" Ilara found her voice, though it came out steadier than she felt. "You know about Thomas?" "Know about him?" Something that might have been dark amusement crossed his face. "He was my brother." The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Brother. This rough-edged cowboy was related to the refined man who'd quoted poetry? "Then you know I was expected," Ilara said, grasping for solid ground. "Thomas and I had an arrangement. I came here in good faith to marry a dead man." Reeves Dalton's bluntness was brutal. "Yeah, I figured that out when I found your letters in Thomas's desk. Took me a while to track down when your stage was arriving. Mail system out here isn't exactly precise." He moved further into the store, and Ilara instinctively stepped back. He noticed she saw recognition flash in those dark eyes, but he didn't stop until he was close enough that she could smell horse and leather and sun-baked earth on him. "Here's the situation, Miss Winslow." He pulled off his hat, revealing hair plastered to his skull with sweat. "My brother made you promises he can't keep on account of being dead. That's unfortunate, but it ain't my problem. However," he held up a hand when she opened her mouth to protest. "However, you're here now, and I'm not heartless enough to leave a woman stranded, so I'll make you an offer. One time only." Ilara's nails dug into her palms. "What kind of offer?" "The ranch needs a housekeeper, has since Thomas died. Actually, since before that. Thomas wasn't exactly domestic, and I've been running the place into the ground trying to manage cattle and keep the house from falling apart. You work for me, you get room, board, and $10 a month. Stay as long as you need to get your bearings and figure out what comes next." It was practical, sensible, even. So why did it feel like a prison sentence? "A housekeeper," Ilara repeated slowly. "You want me to clean and cook. Among other things, laundry, mending. We've got 7 cowboys living in the bunkhouse who'd appreciate someone who can make food that doesn't taste like leather. Can you cook?" Ilara thought of the elaborate French dishes her mother's cook had prepared, of the rare occasions she'd been allowed in the kitchen to watch. "I can learn." Something flickered in his expression. "That'll have to do. Can you ride?" "Horses? No." "Can you shoot?" "Absolutely not." "Can you do anything useful?" The question wasn't cruel, just genuinely curious. Ilara's temper, which she'd been carefully controlling, finally slipped its leash. "I can read Latin and Greek. I can play piano and speak 3 languages. I've read more books than you've probably ever seen, and I can plan a dinner party for 30 without breaking a sweat. But you're right. Out here, in this godforsaken wasteland, those talents are completely useless, just like your dead brother's promises." Silence crashed down like thunder. Mrs. Patterson made a small noise of distress. Reeves Dalton's expression went carefully blank. "You done?" he asked quietly. Ilara's anger drained as quickly as it had risen, leaving her hollow. "Yes, I apologize. That was inappropriate." "No." Reeves settled his hat back on his head. It was honest, and you're right. This place doesn't care about your fancy education. But anger? Anger's useful, means you've got spine. You're going to need that. He turned toward the door, then paused. My wagon's outside. Your trunk won't fit in it without some rearranging, but we'll manage. We need to leave within the hour if we're going to make it back before dark. Ranch is 12 miles out and the road's not friendly. I haven't agreed to your offer, Elara said, though they both knew she had no choice. Reeves looked back at her, and for the first time she saw something other than assessment in his eyes. Weariness, maybe. Or recognition. No, you haven't. So let me put it plain. You can come with me and have a roof over your head, or you can stay here and hope the next stage brings better luck. But Miss Winslow, this town chews up people like you and spits out bones. Whatever you decide, decide quick. I've got cattle that need tending, and daylight's wasting. He walked out, leaving Elara standing in the dim store with her heart pounding and her options narrowing to a single, impossible point. He's not a bad man, Mrs. Patterson said softly. Rough as they come, and not much for pretty words, but he's honest. That counts for something out here. Does it? Elara watched through the window as Reeves began rearranging items in a battered wagon that looked barely roadworthy. He's offering me servitude because his brother promised me a partnership. He's offering you survival. Mrs. Patterson moved beside her. Which is more than most would do. Reeves Dalton could have left you here without a backward glance. Nobody would have blamed him. You're not his responsibility. But he came to town specifically to meet your stage. That says something about his character. Elara wanted to argue, but her practical side, the part that had gotten her through her parents' deaths and her aunt's cold charity, was already calculating. $10 a month wouldn't make her rich, but it was better than nothing. Room and board meant survival, and most importantly, it bought her time to figure out what came next. She couldn't go back to Boston. She had nothing to go back to. Forward was terrifying, but it was also her only option. I'll need a moment to collect myself, Elara said. Take what time you need, honey, though he's right about the daylight. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her shoulder with rough kindness. And Miss Winslow? Don't let pride kill you. Out here, survival's the only victory that matters. 5 minutes later, Elara walked out into the brutal Wyoming sunshine. Reeves had finished arranging the wagon and stood beside it, one boot propped on the wheel, waiting with the patience of stone. Her trunk was secured in the back, looking absurdly pristine among the coiled ropes and tools. I accept your offer, Elara said, stopping a careful distance away. With conditions. His eyebrows rose fractionally. Conditions. I'll work as your housekeeper for 3 months. During that time, I'll give you honest labor in exchange for fair wages. But I'm not a servant. I'm an employee. You'll treat me with respect, and I'll do the same for you. After 3 months, we'll reassess the arrangement. If either of us wishes to terminate it, we can do so without obligation. You negotiate terms like a lawyer. My father was a lawyer. I learned from the best. Something that might have been respect crossed his face. 3 months, fair wages, mutual respect. Agreed. He held out his hand. Elara stared at it. His hand was massive, scarred, the nails embedded with dirt that looked permanent. Shaking it felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. She took his hand. His grip was firm but surprisingly careful, as if he was aware of his own strength and consciously tempering it. Then we have a deal, Mr. Dalton. Reeves, he corrected. If we're going to be living under the same roof, no point in formality. Reeves, she repeated, the name strange on her tongue. He released her hand and gestured to the wagon. Can you climb up, or do you need help? Elara eyed the wagon seat, which was easily 4 feet off the ground. Her skirts would make it nearly impossible. But pride, that stubborn Winslow pride, made her say, I can manage. She couldn't. After an undignified struggle that left her breathless and more than a little embarrassed, she felt Reeves's hands on her waist, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing. He deposited her on the seat, then swung up beside her with the fluid grace of someone who'd been doing it his entire life. Ready? He didn't wait for an answer, just snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, and Elara grabbed the seat with both hands. Broken Creek fell away behind them, disappearing into dust and distance. The land opened up ahead, endless, rolling, utterly empty. No trees, no buildings, No signs of civilization at all, just grassland stretching to impossible horizons under a sky so vast it made her feel insignificant. The silence was overwhelming. In Boston, there was always noise, horses, voices, the rattle of carriages on cobblestones. Here, there was just wind and the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip of horse hooves. "You'll want to cover your face," Reeves said after they'd traveled perhaps a mile. "Sun'll burn you badly otherwise." Alara pulled a handkerchief from her reticule, tying it across her nose and mouth. It helped marginally with the dust, but did nothing for the heat. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her corset dug into her ribs with every breath. She'd never been so physically uncomfortable in her life. "Your brother," she said eventually, because the silence was becoming unbearable. "What was he like?" Reeves was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Different from me." Thomas was the smart one. Read books, knew poetry, planned to make the ranch into something civilized, wanted to breed horses, maybe start a library in Broken Creek. He had dreams bigger than this place could hold. You say that like it was a flaw. Out here? It was. Reeves's voice was flat, matter of fact. Dreams don't survive Wyoming. Cattle survive. Hard work survives. Anything else is decoration, and decoration gets stripped away fast. That's a bleak worldview. It's a realistic one. He glanced at her briefly. Thomas thought he could change this place, make it gentle. I tried to tell him the frontier doesn't bend, it breaks you or makes you harder. He didn't want to believe it. How did he die? Mrs. Patterson said a horse threw him. He was breaking a Mustang. Stupid decision. The horse was too wild, and Thomas didn't have the skill for it. I told him to let me handle it, but he was stubborn, wanted to prove he could do the rough work same as any cowboy. Reeves's jaw tightened. Horse threw him. He landed wrong, broke his neck, was dead before I reached him. Alara heard what he didn't say. I watched my brother die. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Are you? You never met him. I'm sorry you lost your brother, and I'm sorry his death stranded me here. Both things can be true. Reeves made a non-committal sound and said nothing more. The wagon rolled on through the emptiness. Time became fluid under that merciless sun. Alara tried to mark it by the position of shadows, but everything blurred together. Heat, dust, the constant jolting of the wagon, the growing ache in her back and legs. She'd never felt so physically exhausted. Just when she thought she couldn't endure another moment, Reeves pointed ahead. There! She squinted against the glare and saw not much. A collection of buildings huddled against the landscape like they were trying to hide. A ranch house that might have been impressive once but now looked weathered and weary. A large barn, several smaller outbuildings, corrals holding horses that were little more than distant dots. The Dalton Ranch, Reeves said. Home, for better or worse. As they drew closer, Alara's heart sank further. Thomas had described a well-maintained property with flower gardens and painted shutters. Reality was far less romantic. The house desperately needed paint. The porch sagged on one side. Windows were dark and unwelcoming. One of the shutters hung at a drunken angle. This was where she'd be living. It needs work, Reeves said, reading her expression. I know, been meaning to fix things, but there's only so many hours in a day, and cattle don't wait for house repairs. Several men emerged from a long, low building, the bunkhouse, presumably. Cowboys, rough and trail-worn, who stopped to stare at the wagon with undisguised curiosity. Alara felt their eyes on her like physical weight. Reeves pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. Before he could move, one of the cowboys, younger than the others, with red hair and an eager expression, jogged over. Boss, you actually found her? The mail order? He caught himself, eyes darting to Alara. I mean, the lady. This is Miss Winslow, Reeves said, swinging down from the wagon. She'll be housekeeping for us starting today. You treat her with respect, or you'll answer to me, understood? Yes, sir. The young cowboy swept off his hat, revealing hair plastered to his skull. Name's Billy Tucker, ma'am. Pleasure to meet you. Mr. Tucker. Alara's voice came out hoarse from dust and disuse. More cowboys were drifting over now, drawn by curiosity. Reeves made quick introductions. Sam, the trail boss, weathered and gray. Wyatt and Wade, twin brothers who looked identical down to their matching scars. Carlos, quiet and watchful. Old Pete, who had to be 60 if he was a day. And Jack, who grinned at her with more enthusiasm than seemed warranted. "A woman," Jack said. "Boss, you actually got us a woman who can cook? Hell, I might cry." "Watch your language," Reeves said sharply. "There's a lady present." "Sorry, ma'am." Jack didn't look particularly sorry, but he stepped back obligingly. Reeves moved to help Alara down from the wagon. This time she let him without protest. Her legs had gone stiff from the journey, and she wasn't sure they'd hold her weight. His hands on her waist were steady, impersonal. He set her on solid ground and stepped back immediately. "Billy, get Miss Winslow's trunk. Rest of you, back to work. Cattle won't move themselves." The cowboys dispersed reluctantly, casting backward glances. Billy struggled with the trunk. It was heavier than he'd expected, but managed to hoist it onto his shoulder. "I'll show you the house," Reeves said to Alara. Well, you'll see." He led her up the sagging porch steps to a door that protested on rusty hinges. Inside, Alara stopped short. The house wasn't just neglected, it was barely functional. Dust coated every surface in a thick film. The parlor held mismatched furniture covered in what looked like saddle blankets. Dishes were piled in the kitchen sink, some crusted with food so old it had fossilized. The floor was tracked with mud and worse. Cobwebs hung from the corners like macabre decorations. "Thomas kept it nicer," Reeves said, sounding almost offensive. "After he died, I had other priorities. Figured cleaning could wait." "How long did you wait?" Alara asked faintly. 3 months, give or take." 3 months of accumulated filth. Alara felt something between horror and overwhelm rising in her chest. This wasn't just housework. This was archaeological excavation. "Your room's upstairs." Reeves headed for a staircase that creaked ominously under his weight. "Thomas had it fixed up for you before. Should still be decent." Billy followed with the trunk, puffing with effort. The upstairs hallway was dimmer, but marginally cleaner. Reeves pushed open a door to reveal a modest bedroom. Single bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a washstand, and a window that actually looked clean. "This was supposed to be your room," Reeves said. "The main bedroom was going to be, well, Thomas had plans." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "I sleep downstairs now, the study. You'll have privacy up here." It was more consideration than Alara had expected. "Thank you." Billy deposited the trunk at the foot of the bed with a grateful groan. "That's a heavy one, ma'am. What have you got in there?" "Books, mostly." At their surprised looks, she added, "I wasn't going to leave them behind." "Books." Billy grinned. "Boss, you hear that? A woman who reads. We might actually get some culture around here." "We need cooking more than culture," Reeves said dryly. "Billy, get back to work. Miss Winslow, you've got the rest of today to settle in. Tomorrow morning, I'll expect breakfast for 9 at dawn. Can you manage that?" 9 men, dawn, breakfast. Alara had never cooked breakfast for 9 men in her life. She had no idea if she could manage it. "I'll manage," she said, because what other choice did she have? Reeves studied her for a long moment, those dark eyes searching for something. "You'll do," he said finally. "You've got steel in you, even if you don't know it yet." He left, Billy trailing after him. Their boots thundered down the stairs, and then Alara was alone in a stranger's house, in a territory she'd never wanted to see, with a life she'd never imagined living. She moved to the window. Outside, Reeves was striding toward the barn, his posture straight despite what must be exhaustion from a day that had started God knew when. He moved with purpose, with confidence, utterly at home in this harsh landscape. She'd never felt more foreign in her life. That night, after unpacking the few possessions she'd brought and washing the worst of the travel dust from her skin, using the tepid water in the pitcher, Alara lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to Wyoming wind howl around the house. It sounded like wolves. It sounded like loneliness. Somewhere below, she could hear the faint sounds of Reeves moving around. Occasionally, the creak of a floorboard, the clink of what might be dishes. He was as aware of her presence as she was of his. Two strangers bound by circumstance, trying to navigate an impossible situation. She thought of Thomas, the man she'd never met but had built dreams around. Had he lain in this house listening to the same wind? Had he imagined her here, sharing his life, making this rough place into something softer? It didn't matter now. Thomas was gone, and she was left with his brother, a man who seemed carved from the same harsh stone as the land itself. Tomorrow, she'd begin learning how to survive in Wyoming. Tonight, she let herself grieve the life she'd lost and the one she'd never have. Outside, the wind screamed its welcome. Inside, Alara Winslow closed her eyes and tried to believe she'd made the right choice. Only time would tell if she could endure what came next. Dawn came to Wyoming like a slap, sudden, harsh, and unforgiving. Alara jolted awake to the sound of roosters screaming their territorial claims, and boots thundering across wooden floors downstairs. For one disoriented moment, she thought she was back in Boston, that the past week had been nothing but fever dream. Then she opened her eyes to rough wooden walls and a ceiling stained with water damage, and reality crashed back with crushing weight. She had exactly 30 minutes to prepare breakfast for 9 men, men who expected competence she didn't possess. Her hands shook as she dressed, fumbling with buttons and laces. The traveling dress from yesterday was impossible, far too restrictive for the work ahead. She dug through her trunk with growing desperation until she found the plainest dress she owned, a dark gray cotton thing she'd packed almost as an afterthought. It would have to do. The kitchen, when she finally gathered courage to face it, looked even worse in morning light. Grease coated the stove in layers so thick they'd fossilized. The sink overflowed with dishes that had been soaking for what appeared to be weeks. Something in the corner might have been food once, but it evolved into a new life form. The smell alone nearly sent her back upstairs. "You can do this," Alara whispered to herself, then immediately felt foolish. Talking to yourself was the first sign of madness, and she'd been in Wyoming less than 24 hours. She found wood stacked beside the stove and managed, after several attempts and one minor burn, to coax a fire to life. The ancient stove resisted her efforts with the stubbornness of an old mule, belching smoke until she adjusted something that might have been a damper. Flour resided in a barrel that weighed more than she did. Salt occupied a wooden box that looked like it predated the Civil War. Coffee beans sat in a tin marked with Spanish writing she couldn't decipher. 9 men. Breakfast. Dawn. Alara had watched her family's cook make biscuits exactly 3 times in her life. She tried to summon those memories now, her hands moving with more hope than skill. Flour, lard, buttermilk, except there was no buttermilk, so she used water and prayed. The dough came together reluctantly, fighting her every step. She patted it out on a board that probably needed burning for health reasons, cut circles with the rim of a glass, and shoved the entire mess into the oven. Eggs. There had to be eggs somewhere. She found them eventually in a basket on the back porch, warm from the hens and speckled with things she chose not to examine closely. She'd never actually cooked an egg in her life, but how hard could it be? You cracked them into a pan, applied heat, and prayed. The prayer didn't work. The first 3 eggs turned into blackened rubber before she understood the stove's temperament. The next 6 fared marginally better, still overcooked, but at least recognizable as food. She piled them onto the platter that had seen better decades and turned her attention to the coffee. The coffee boiler was a mysterious contraption that seemed designed by someone who hated humanity. She dumped grounds into what she hoped was the right compartment, added water to another, and waited. The resulting liquid came out black as sin and probably twice as bitter, but it was hot and caffeinated, which seemed like the minimum requirement. By the time boots started hitting the porch, the sound she was rapidly learning to dread, Alara had assembled something that could generously be called breakfast. Biscuits that were either undercooked or burned depending on which part you bit into. Eggs with the consistency of shoe leather. Coffee that could strip paint. A jar of preserves she'd found in the pantry that might have been edible in 1865. The Cowboys filed in with the organized chaos of men who'd done this 1,000 times. They scraped chairs across floors, slapped hats on pegs, jostled for position with the easy camaraderie of people who knew each other too well. Then they saw the food, and conversation died. "Ma'am," Sam said carefully, his weathered face working through complicated emotions. "This is real nice of you." Alara wanted to sink through the floor. "I apologize, I'm not accustomed to cooking for large groups, or cooking at all, really. But it's edible, I promise. Edible's a strong word, Jack muttered, then yelped when old Pete kicked him under the table. It looks wonderful, Billy said with the desperate enthusiasm of someone trying to salvage a disaster. He grabbed a biscuit, bit into it, and his face went through a remarkable journey of expressions. Real firm, good texture. You can't polish a turd, boy, old Pete said, but he was already loading his plate. Ma'am, no offense, but did you actually know Thomas was expecting you? Because he told me his bride could cook like an angel. He may have been optimistic, Elara admitted, her cheeks burning. I'll improve, I promise. Can't get much worse, Wyatt said, earning glares from his twin. The door opened again and Reeves entered. Unlike his men, who'd clearly made some effort to wash up, he looked like he'd been awake for hours doing hard labor. Dust caked his shirt, his hair stuck up in directions that defied physics. He took one look at the table, and something flickered across his face too quickly to read. Coffee, was all he said, dropping into the chair at the head of the table. Elara poured him a cup with trembling hands. He took a sip, and his eyebrows rose fractionally. Strong. Is that diplomatic for undrinkable? She couldn't keep the edge from her voice. It's diplomatic for strong. He took another sip, as if to prove the point. I've had worse. Usually made it myself. The other cowboys took this as permission to eat. They attacked the food with the pragmatism of men who understood that calories mattered more than quality. Elara stood by the stove, unsure whether she was supposed to join them or maintain some sort of servant's distance. Sit down, Reeves said without looking up. You cooked it, you eat it. She took the empty chair beside Billy, who smiled encouragingly. The biscuit on her plate could have been used as a weapon. She nibbled at the edge and tasted failure mixed with too much salt. First attempt's always rough, Sam offered. My wife burned water the first month we were married. Now she can make stew that'll make a grown man weep with joy. You'll get there. If we survive long enough, Jack said, then raised his hands defensively when everyone glared at him. What? I'm just saying, honesty's a virtue. So's keeping your fool mouth shut, Reeves said mildly, but there was steel underneath. Miss Winslow's learning. Any of you want to volunteer to cook instead? The table fell silent. Apparently none of them wanted that responsibility. That's what I thought. Reeves stood, draining his coffee in 3 long gulps. Sam, take Wade and Carlos to check the north fence. Billy, you're with Jack on the east pasture. I want a count of how many head we've got out there. Wyatt and Pete, water trough repairs. I'll be at the south ridge evaluating that land the railroad's eyeing. Railroad? Elara asked before she could stop herself. Reeves paused, and she caught something dangerous in his expression. There's a company that thinks they can run track through part of the ranch. They're wrong, but they haven't accepted that yet. Not your concern. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door. The other men followed in a choreographed exodus, leaving Elara alone with the ruins of her first attempt at frontier cooking. The dishes mocked her from the table. The destroyed kitchen mocked her from all sides. She stood in the middle of it all and felt tears burning behind her eyes. Tears of frustration, exhaustion, and the overwhelming realization that she had no idea what she was doing. You will not cry, she told herself firmly. Winslows don't cry. We adapt. So she adapted. She rolled up her sleeves, tied her hair back with a ribbon that had seen better days, and declared war on the kitchen. If she couldn't cook yet, she could at least clean. That required no special skill, just determination and a willingness to get dirty. Hours blurred together in a haze of scrubbing, scouring, and discovering new levels of filth she hadn't known existed. The dishes alone took 90 minutes. The stove required another hour of brutal labor that left her hands raw and her back screaming. She found cleaning supplies in a cupboard that also housed a family of mice who seemed as surprised to see her as she was to see them. By noon, the kitchen looked almost habitable. The floor had been swept and mopped, twice. The dishes were clean and stacked neatly. The stove, while still ancient, no longer looked like a health hazard. The windows let in actual sunlight, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. Elara stood in the middle of her small victory and felt something close to pride. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Well, damn! She spun around to find Reeves standing in the doorway, his eyes moving over the transformed kitchen with what might have been surprise. I didn't hear you come in, Elara said, suddenly aware of how she must look. hair falling from its pins, dress soaked with sweat and dirty water, hands red and raw. "Didn't mean to startle you." He stepped fully into the kitchen, his boots echoing on the clean floor. "This is different. Good different. It's cleaner, at least." She pushed a strand of hair from her face. "Though I'll need to address the rest of the house. It's in similar condition. The house can wait. The men need feeding first. That's priority." He moved to the coffee pot, found it empty, and looked faintly disappointed. "You figure out the stove?" "We've reached an understanding. It tries to kill me, and I coerce it into producing heat." She moved to the water pump. "I can make more coffee if you'd like." "I'd like?" He pulled out a chair, turning it backward and straddling it with easy grace. "You mind if I watch? Trying to figure out how you made it so strong this morning." Alara's hand stilled on the coffee tin. Having him watch felt oddly intimate, like being observed during something private. But she nodded and began the process, hyper-aware of his eyes tracking her movements. "You add too much grounds," he said after a moment. "That's why it's bitter. Half that amount will work fine." She adjusted, feeling foolish. "I've never made coffee before." "I gathered." There was no mockery in his voice, just statement of fact. "You've never done any of this before, have you? Cooking, cleaning, any of it?" Alara's jaw tightened. "I was raised to be a gentleman's wife, not a servant. My education focused on things like music and literature. Practical skills weren't considered necessary. And now you're here." He said it almost gently. "In a place where your education doesn't mean much, learning skills you never needed before. That's got to be hard." The unexpected sympathy nearly undid her. She focused on the coffee, blinking rapidly. "It's an adjustment." That's a diplomatic word for it. He was quiet a moment. Thomas would have handled this better. He had a gentle way about him, knew how to make people comfortable. "I'm not good at that." "You're honest," Alara said. "That's worth something." "Is it? Or is it just another word for tactless?" She turned to face him fully, surprised to find what might have been humor in his dark eyes. "You came to town specifically to meet my stage. You offered me employment when you could have left me stranded. Those weren't the actions of a tactless man. They were the actions of a practical one. Ranch needs a housekeeper." But his expression softened fractionally. "Though I'll admit I wasn't expecting someone quite so refined." "Useless, you mean?" "Green," he corrected. "There's a difference. Useless means you can't learn. Green just means you haven't yet." He stood, moving to look out the window at the land beyond. "You cleaned this kitchen in one morning. That's not useless. That's determined. Determination matters out here more than skill." Alara poured the finished coffee into a clean cup, one she'd scrubbed herself, and brought it to him. "What else matters?" He took the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "Adaptability. Strength, both physical and mental. Willingness to do what needs doing, even when it's hard or ugly. Sense of humor helps, too, because this land will break you if you take it too seriously." Do you have a sense of humor?" She was surprised by her own boldness. Reeves's lips twitched. "Been told I don't. Also been told I'm about as warm as a January wind and twice as mean. But I keep the ranch running, and that's what matters." "Is that all that matters? Keeping things running? Out here?" "Yeah." He sipped the coffee, nodded approval. "This is better. See? You're learning already." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Alara had never experienced. Wake at dawn, cook breakfast that improved incrementally, clean whatever part of the house seemed most desperate, attempt lunch that was only slightly less disastrous than breakfast, continue cleaning, cook dinner while praying for edibility, collapse into bed with muscles screaming protests she'd never imagined possible. The Cowboys, to their credit, were patient. Billy appointed himself her unofficial teacher, showing her how to work the stove, where supplies were kept, which pots were salvageable and which should be taken out back and shot. Sam shared his wife's biscuit recipe, written in careful script on paper soft with age. Even Jack, who'd been most critical that first morning, begrudgingly admitted her coffee had become drinkable, almost good. But it was the evenings that surprised her most. The first evening, after a dinner that hadn't actively poisoned anyone, Alara stepped onto the porch for air. The day's heat was finally breaking, and the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in colors she'd never seen in Boston, purples and golds and reds so vivid they seemed unreal. She stood gripping the railing, watching the land transform from harsh to beautiful in the fading light. It does that every night. She didn't jump this time. She was learning to recognize Reeves's approach by the particular cadence of his boots. He joined her at the railing, maintaining a careful distance that she appreciated. "Does what?" she asked. "Tricks you into thinking it's gentle. That sunset there? It's a lie. Come morning, this land will be trying to kill you again." That's a remarkably pessimistic worldview. It's a survival worldview. He pulled out a small knife and a piece of wood, began whittling with practiced ease. "You can't afford to get soft out here. The moment you think you've got it figured out, Wyoming reminds you who's in charge." Alara watched his hands work. Strong hands, scarred and calloused, moving with surprising delicacy. "What are you making?" "Nothing in particular, just habit. Keeps my hands busy." He glanced at her. "How are yours? Saw they were raw this morning." She'd wrapped them in strips of cloth to protect the worst blisters. "They'll heal. They'll get worse before they get better. You're not used to this kind of work." He pocketed the knife and wood. "There's salve in the medicine cabinet upstairs, left side. Use it before bed, or you won't be able to hold a spoon come morning." It was the closest thing to tenderness she'd heard from him. "Thank you." They stood in silence as darkness crept across the land. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a sound both lonely and wild that made Alara shiver despite the lingering warmth. "Do you miss it?" Reeves asked suddenly. "Boston." "Every moment," she admitted. "And also not at all. Is that strange?" "No." He leaned against the railing, tilting his head back to watch stars beginning to emerge. "This place has a way of getting in your blood, even when you hate it. I've been here my whole life, and I still can't decide if Wyoming's heaven or hell." "What keeps you here, then?" "It's home, and it's mine." Something fierce entered his voice. "My father built this ranch from nothing, lost my mother to childbirth when Thomas was born, raised us himself while running cattle and fighting weather and dealing with every kind of disaster you can imagine. He taught us that this land might try to kill you, but it's honest about it. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not." "Unlike people," Alara said softly. "Unlike people." He looked at her directly. "You're angry at Thomas for lying to you in those letters." It wasn't a question. "Yes." He wasn't lying exactly. He was describing the life he wanted to build, not the one he had. Thomas always lived in his head more than reality. Reeves's expression was complicated, grief and affection and frustration all tangled together. He wanted to be the kind of man who could quote poetry and keep a civilized home. Tried real hard to be that person. But underneath, he was still a ranch kid who'd rather spend time with horses than people. Why didn't he just say that in his letters? Because he knew you wouldn't come. Reeves met her eyes. He knew a woman like you needed promises of culture and refinement. So he gave you what you needed to hear, figuring he could make it true once you arrived. That's not malicious, Miss Winslow. That's just desperate. Alara absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. She'd spent so much time being angry at Thomas, at his deception, that she hadn't considered his perspective. A lonely man, reaching out for connection, willing to promise anything to escape solitude. "I would have preferred honesty," she said finally. "And you'd have stayed in Boston." He pushed off the railing. "I'm not defending what he did, just explaining it. Thomas made a mistake, but he made it from loneliness, not cruelty. That's worth remembering." He headed for the door, then paused. "That's salve. Use it. You won't be useful to anyone if your hands get infected." Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone with the darkening sky and thoughts she didn't know what to do with. The evening porch visits became routine. After dinner, after the Cowboys had retreated to the bunkhouse and the day's work was finally done, Alara would step outside for air, and Reeves would materialize within minutes. They never planned it, never discussed it, but it happened with the inevitability of sunrise. Sometimes they talked, brief exchanges about the ranch, the weather, the peculiarities of Wyoming life. More often, they simply existed in comfortable silence, two people too tired for conversation, but finding something peaceful in shared space. "You're getting better at the cooking," Reeves said one evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival. Last night's roast didn't try to kill anyone. High praise indeed. Alara had discovered she could match his dry humor when she forgot to be intimidated. I've graduated from actively dangerous to merely unpleasant. Hey now, I said it was good. You said it didn't try to kill anyone. That's not the same as good. His lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Fair point. It was adequate. Still not good. It was better than anything I could make. He pulled out his whittling knife, a piece of wood that was starting to look like something. Maybe a horse? That's got to count for something. It counts for you having impossibly low standards. She watched his hands work, mesmerized by the economical movements. What happened to not getting soft? This seems soft. Whittling on the porch in the evening. This is maintenance. Man's got to have something to do with his hands, or he goes crazy. He blew away a curl of wood. Besides, the work never stops. I'm out here thinking about fence repairs and water rights and whether we've got enough hay put by for winter. It just looks like relaxing. Do you ever actually relax? Can't afford to. He said it simply, without self-pity. Ranch this size with just me running it? The moment I relax is the moment something goes catastrophically wrong. You have 7 cowboys working for you. I have 7 cowboys who need direction, wages, and someone to solve problems when they arise, which is constantly. Sam's good, but he's not an owner. It's different when it's your name on the deed, your family's legacy on the line. He pocketed the knife. Thomas understood that, even if he wasn't great at the actual running of things. Now it's just me, and I'm not enough. That's why I needed a housekeeper. One less thing to manage. Alara heard the weight in his words. You're tired. I've been tired since the day Thomas died. He stood abruptly, as if regretting the honesty. I should check the horses before bed. You need anything from the barn before I lock up? No, I'm fine. He nodded and stepped off the porch, disappearing into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow him whole. Alara remained staring at the sky and wondering about the man who carried so much weight alone. The next morning, she woke to shouting. Alara threw on her dress and rushed downstairs to find chaos. Cowboys crowded the kitchen, voices overlapping in urgent confusion. Through the press of bodies, she glimpsed Reeves leaning against the counter, his face pale under the sun brown, his left hand wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth. What happened? She pushed through without thinking, her training, such as it was, kicking in automatically. Let me see. It's nothing, Reeves said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Just a fence wire snapped wrong. Let me see, she repeated, her tone brooking no argument. He unwrapped the cloth reluctantly, revealing a gash across his palm that was deep and still bleeding freely. Alara's stomach lurched, but she forced herself to focus. Sam, I need clean water boiling immediately. Billy, there's alcohol in the medicine cabinet upstairs. Bring it and whatever bandages you find. Jack, clear this table so I have space to work. The cowboys jumped to obey, responding to her authority without question. Within minutes, she had Reeves seated with his hand on the cleared table, supplies arranged within reach. This is going to hurt, she warned, threading a needle with thread she'd hastily sterilized in boiling water. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen wounds stitched before. My father cut himself badly once, and I watched our physician work. You watched once, and now you're going to sew up my hand? Reeves looked somewhere between impressed and alarmed. Do you have a better option? The nearest doctor is in Broken Creek, 12 miles away, and you'll bleed significantly before we get there. She poured alcohol over the wound without warning. Reeves hissed through his teeth, every muscle going rigid. Hell. Language, she said absently, the way he'd said it to his men that first morning. Then she began stitching. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady through sheer will. The needle pierced skin, drew thread through, tied off. 1 stitch. 2. Reeves watched with dark eyes that seemed to be evaluating her more than his own injury. By the 5th stitch, she'd found a rhythm. Not skillful, but functional. Where did you learn to do this? He asked, his voice strained. I told you, I watched once, and I've done needlework since I was a child. It's not entirely different. It was entirely different, but he didn't need to know how terrified she was. Stay still. Yes, ma'am. 10 stitches later, the wound was closed, not prettily, but securely. Alara wrapped it in clean bandages, her hands steady now that the worst was over. You'll need to keep that clean and dry. Change the bandages daily. If you see any signs of infection, redness, heat, pus, you'll need a real doctor. She stepped back, suddenly aware of how close she'd been standing. And for God's sake, be more careful with fence wire. Reeves flexed his hand experimentally, wincing. You just stitched up a man's hand after watching the procedure once, years ago, and you're lecturing me about being careful? I didn't have a choice. You did. Fair point. He stood, testing the bandage. Thank you, Miss Winslow. You might have saved me a trip to town and a doctor's bill I can't afford. The other cowboys, who'd been watching in reverent silence, suddenly found their voices. That was amazing, ma'am, Billy breathed. You just did it, without even flinching. I flinched internally, Alara admitted. But yes, I did it. Now all of you, out of my kitchen. I have breakfast to prepare, and standing around gawking won't make it cook itself. They scattered like surprised quail, leaving her alone with Reeves. He studied her with an expression she couldn't decipher. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, just you're full of surprises, Miss Winslow. Alara, she said impulsively. We've been living under the same roof for 2 weeks, and you've seen me at my worst. You might as well use my first name. Alara. He said it carefully, like he was testing the weight of it. All right. And you should probably call me Reeves, since you've now literally held my blood in your hands. That's a disturbing way to phrase it. Accurate, though. His eyes held something warm, almost like humor. Thank you. Really, that took guts. It took desperation and stubbornness. I'm not sure that qualifies as courage. Out here, they're the same thing. He headed for the door, then paused. Tonight, if you're out on the porch, I'll tell you about the railroad situation. Figure you've earned the right to know what's happening with the ranch, since you're part of keeping it running. He left before she could respond, but warmth bloomed in her chest. Part of keeping it running. Not just a housekeeper, not just a temporary solution, part of something. That evening, true to his word, Reeves explained the railroad problem. A company called Western Continental was pushing through the territory, buying up land rights and cutting deals with anyone they couldn't strong-arm into selling. They wanted a strip of Dalton land, prime grazing territory that cut through the ranch's heart. They claim my father's original deed is invalid, Reeves said, anger simmering beneath controlled words. Say there's some technicality about surveying or registration or God knows what. Their lawyers got paperwork that looks official enough to fool a judge, and they're pushing for a court decision that would give them eminent domain. Can they do that? Alara asked, horrified. They can try. Whether they succeed depends on how good their forgeries are and how corrupt the judge is. He gripped the porch railing hard enough that his knuckles went white. My father spent 20 years building this ranch, survived drought, harsh winters, raids from cattle rustlers, and every other disaster Wyoming could throw at him. He passed it to me and Thomas with the expectation we'd protect it. I'm not about to lose it to railroad bastards with fake documents. What can you do? Fight them in court, prove our claim is legitimate, find evidence their paperwork's fraudulent. He released the railing, flexing his bandaged hand absently. Problem is, that takes time and money, and I'm short on both. Every day spent fighting them is a day I'm not running the ranch, which means work doesn't get done, which means we fall further behind. Alara thought of her father, who'd spent years navigating legal complexities for his clients. What if you had someone who could help? Someone who understands legal documents and might be able to find the weaknesses in their claim? Reeves looked at her sharply. You? My father was a lawyer. I grew up reading case files and legal briefs for entertainment. At his skeptical expression, she added, I was a strange child, but I learned how to analyze arguments, find inconsistencies. Let me look at their documents. Maybe I'll see something you've missed. This isn't some Boston courtroom dispute. These men play dirty. Then it's fortunate I'm already covered in actual dirt and have little left to lose. She met his eyes steadily. Let me help, Reeves. Not because I'm obligated, but because it's right. Your father built something good here. It shouldn't be stolen by men with forged papers. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw him reassessing, recalculating what she was capable of. Finally, he nodded. All right, documents are in the study. I'll show you tomorrow after breakfast. He turned to go, then looked back. Elara, thank you. For the hand and for this. You didn't have to offer. Yes, I did. This is my home now, too, at least for the next couple of months. I have a stake in its survival. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. I suppose you do. That night, lying in bed listening to the Wyoming wind, Elara realized something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just surviving until she could escape. She was beginning to care about this rough place and the complicated man trying desperately to hold it together. It was terrifying. It was also oddly exhilarating. Outside her window, stars wheeled through an endless sky, and somewhere in the house below, Reeves was probably still awake, worrying about fences and cattle and railroad companies. Two people from different worlds, bound together by circumstance and stubbornness. She was starting to think maybe that was enough. The study smelled of leather, tobacco, and old paper, scents that transported Elara back to her father's office in Boston with such visceral clarity that she had to pause in the doorway and steady herself. Reeves was already inside, spreading documents across a desk scarred with decades of use. Morning light slanted through dusty windows, illuminating papers that looked official enough to be intimidating. "This is everything they've sent," Reeves said without preamble. "Deeds, surveys, court filings. Their lawyer's name is Hastings, Marcus Hastings out of Cheyenne. Slick as oil and twice as dirty, according to everyone I've talked to." Elara moved to the desk, her fingers itching to touch the documents. This was familiar territory, the kind of intellectual puzzle she'd been trained for. "May I?" He gestured permission, then leaned against the bookshelf to watch. She felt his eyes on her as she began reading, but forced herself to focus on the words. Legal language was its own dialect, dense and self-referential, designed to obscure as much as clarify. But her father had taught her to read between the lines, to find the places where arguments grew thin or logic faltered. The first document was a survey claiming the Dalton Ranch boundaries were incorrectly recorded in the Territorial Land Office. The second was a deed allegedly predating the Dalton claim, signed by someone named Jeremiah Pike and transferring ownership to Western Continental Railroad. The third was a court petition demanding the Daltons either sell the disputed land or face eminent domain proceedings. "This Pike deed," Elara said slowly, running her finger along the signature. "When was it supposedly recorded?" "March 1868. Reeves's voice was tight with controlled anger. 4 years before my father filed his claim. "But your father was here before 1868, wasn't he?" "Been ranching this land since 1865. Right after the war ended, he came west with nothing but determination and started building." Reeves pushed off the bookshelf, moving to stand beside her. "There was no Jeremiah Pike. This land was unclaimed territory when my father settled it. He followed every legal requirement, paid every fee, got everything properly recorded." Elara held the Pike deed up to the light, examining the paper itself. "This document looks old, but paper can be aged artificially. My father once exposed a fraudulent will because the ink was too fresh, despite claims the document was decades old." She studied the signature carefully. "Do you have your father's original filing documents?" "Should be in that cabinet." Reeves moved to a battered file cabinet in the corner, pulling open drawers until he found what he was looking for. "Here. Everything my father kept regarding the ranch claim." She spread the documents side by side, the fraudulent Pike deed and the legitimate Dalton papers. For several minutes, she read in silence, her mind working through the legal language, comparing styles, searching for inconsistencies. "There," she said suddenly, pointing. "Look at the legal description of the land boundaries in the Pike deed. It references the Broken Creek Township Survey of 1867. But I'm looking at the Dalton deed, and it says the township wasn't officially surveyed until 1869. The Pike deed is referencing a survey that didn't exist when it was allegedly signed." Reeves leaned closer, his shoulder nearly touching hers. She could feel the heat of him, smell the sun and leather scent that seemed to cling to everything he owned. "You're saying they made a mistake?" "I'm saying whoever forged this deed wasn't careful enough with their historical research. It's a small detail, the kind of thing most people wouldn't catch, but it proves the document is fraudulent." She felt excitement building, the thrill of intellectual victory. If we can prove the Pike deed is fake, their entire claim falls apart. Can you prove it in court? I can present the evidence. Whether a judge believes it depends on factors beyond logic, how much the railroad has paid him, mostly. She looked up and found his face very close to hers, his dark eyes intense. But it's leverage. At minimum, it forces them to explain the discrepancy. Something shifted in Reeves's expression, a warmth she hadn't seen before. You really found something, just like that. Half an hour of reading, and you found the flaw. It's what I was trained for. My father used to say the law is just another kind of story, and every story has weak points if you know where to look. She felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze and stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. What do we do with this information? We take it to our lawyer in Broken Creek, man named Foster, honest as they come but not exactly brilliant. Maybe with your findings he'll have ammunition to fight back. Reeves gathered the documents carefully. There's a town council meeting tomorrow night. Hastings is supposed to present the railroad's case publicly, try to get community support for the land seizure. If we can expose the fraud there in front of witnesses, it'll be harder for him to push this through quietly. You want to confront him publicly? I want to embarrass him publicly. Want to make it clear the railroad is trying to steal land through forged documents. People in Broken Creek might not care much about legal technicalities, but they understand theft. His jaw tightened. And they don't like seeing one of their own get robbed. Alara thought of the hostile town she'd first encountered, the people who'd looked at her with indifference or suspicion. Will they support you? They didn't seem particularly friendly when I arrived. Broken Creek's not friendly to outsiders. Takes time to earn trust here. But I was born in Wyoming territory. My father's buried in the town cemetery. Most of these people have known me since I was a kid, causing trouble behind the general store. He managed a grim smile. They might not love me, but I'm one of theirs. The railroad? They're the real outsiders. Then we should prepare thoroughly. If we're going to expose Hastings, we need to be absolutely certain of our facts. Any mistake, and he'll use it to discredit everything we say. Reeves looked at her with something approaching admiration. You're thinking like a fighter. I'm thinking like my father's daughter. He taught me that preparation wins cases more than eloquence. She straightened her shoulders, feeling purpose solidify. Let me spend today going through everything, your father's documents, their filings, anything relevant. I'll build an argument that even a paid-off judge couldn't ignore. You do that? Spend your whole day on this? Would you rather I spend it making lunch that tries to kill you? At his startled expression, she allowed herself a small smile. The Cowboys can manage one meal without me. This is more important. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw him making some internal calculation, weighing risks and benefits. Finally, he nodded. All right. The study's yours for the day. I'll tell the men you're working on ranch business and not to be disturbed. If you need anything, I'll manage. I've spent most of my life in libraries and offices. This is familiar ground. After he left, Alara settled into the desk chair. Thomas's chair, she supposed, though now it felt like neutral territory. The documents spread before her like pieces of a puzzle, and she attacked them with the systematic thoroughness her father had drilled into her. Every claim the railroad made, she traced to its source. Every date she verified against historical records Reeves's father had meticulously kept. Every signature she examined for inconsistencies. Hours passed in focused concentration. The sun tracked across the floor. Her back began to ache from hunching over papers, and her eyes burned from squinting at cramped handwriting. But she kept working, driven by something beyond obligation. This mattered. The ranch mattered. And if she was being honest with herself, Reeves mattered. That thought made her pause, pen hovering over her notes. When had that happened? When had the rough cowboy who'd met her stage with devastating news become someone she cared about protecting? She couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had happened gradually, in evening conversations on the porch and quiet moments of shared space. In the way he'd thanked her for stitching his hand, and how he'd trusted her with this, the thing that mattered most to him. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Billy stuck his head in, looking apologetic. Sorry to bother you, Miss Alara, but it's past 2 o'clock and the boss said to make sure you eat something. I brought lunch. He held up a plate covered with a cloth. 2 o'clock? Alara looked at the window in surprise. The light had shifted significantly without her noticing. I didn't realize. Boss said you'd get absorbed and forget. Billy set the plate on a clear corner of the desk. It's just bread and cheese and some of that dried beef, nothing fancy, but you need to keep your strength up. She felt oddly touched by the concern. Thank you, Billy. That was thoughtful. Wasn't me, was the boss. He's been checking every hour to see if you'd come out yet. Finally sent me in to make sure you hadn't collapsed or something. Billy grinned. Never seen him fuss over someone like that before. After Billy left, Elara ate mechanically while continuing to read, but her mind kept snagging on his words. Reeves had been checking on her, worrying about her. The man who claimed to be hard as Wyoming stone was showing cracks of something softer underneath. By the time evening approached, she'd built a comprehensive case. The Pike deed was fraudulent. She'd found 3 separate anachronisms that proved it couldn't have been created when claimed. The survey references were impossible. The legal language used phrasing that didn't enter common usage until the 1870s. Even the paper type was wrong for the alleged date. More than that, she'd traced the chain of supposed ownership and found it led nowhere. Jeremiah Pike didn't exist in any territorial records. No birth certificate, no death certificate, no property holdings beyond this single contested deed. He was a ghost invented to steal from the living. She was writing her final notes when the door opened and Reeves entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked exhausted, dust-covered, and hollow-eyed, the kind of tired that came from physical labor combined with constant worry. You're still at it, he said, handing her one of the cups. Billy said you barely touched lunch. I ate enough. She accepted the coffee gratefully, her hands cramping from hours of writing, and I found more problems with their case. Reeves, this Pike deed isn't just slightly fraudulent, it's completely fabricated. I can prove it multiple ways. She walked him through her findings, watching his expression shift from tired resignation to sharp attention to something like hope. When she finished, he was leaning over the desk, studying her notes with intensity that made her nervous. This is solid, he said finally, really solid. Elara, this could actually work. In a fair courtroom, it would definitely work, but we're not guaranteed fairness. No, but we're guaranteed an audience tomorrow night. And public opinion matters, even to corrupt judges. He straightened, rolling his shoulders to ease tension. You did good work today. Better than I had any right to expect. You gave me purpose, she said honestly. I've been feeling useless since I arrived, unable to cook properly, unfamiliar with ranch work, out of place in every way. This, though? This I can do. You're not useless. His voice was firm. You've kept 7 cowboys fed without killing them, which is more impressive than you think. You stitched up my hand when it needed it. You've cleaned a house that was damn near condemned. And now you've possibly saved my ranch. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. You're not useless, Elara. You're just different from what I expected. Better, in ways I'm still figuring out. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Elara's heart was beating faster than the moment warranted. She forced herself to break eye contact, looking back at the papers. We should prepare for tomorrow. If I'm going to present this information, I need to practice. I'm good at research, but public speaking isn't exactly my strength. You'll be fine. Just speak clearly and stick to facts. People respect confidence, even if they don't understand all the details. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Elara, whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for trying. It means more than I know how to say. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with racing thoughts and feelings she didn't want to examine too closely. The next evening found them riding into Broken Creek in the buckboard wagon, both dressed as well as frontier life allowed. Reeves had found a clean shirt somewhere, though his hat remained as battered as ever. Elara wore her least damaged dress, a dark blue cotton that was hopelessly plain by Boston standards, but apparently impressive here. You look nice, Reeves said as they approached town, then immediately looked uncomfortable, as if the compliment had escaped without permission. Thank you. You clean up reasonably well yourself. Reasonably well. That's generous. But she saw his lips twitch toward a smile. The town hall was already crowded when they arrived. Ranchers, shopkeepers, cowboys, and townspeople packed into a space built for half their number. Conversations died as Elara and Reeves entered. She felt every eye track them, felt the weight of curiosity and judgment. "That's Dalton," someone whispered, "and the mail order bride. Heard she's living out at his ranch. Wonder what Thomas would think about that." Alara kept her chin up and her expression neutral, the way her mother had taught her to handle Boston society gossips. These people were no different, just blunter about their speculation. Reeves guided her to seats near the front, his hand light on her elbow. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Small-town gossip is like Wyoming wind, constant and meaningless." Marcus Hastings stood at the front of the room, and Alara disliked him immediately. He was everything her father had taught her to distrust. Too smooth, too polished, too confident. His suit was expensive Eastern fabric, completely out of place here. His smile showed too many teeth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily, "thank you for gathering tonight. I represent Western Continental Railroad, a company committed to bringing progress and prosperity to this great territory. We're here to discuss an unfortunate land dispute that's preventing valuable development." He spoke for 20 minutes, painting the railroad as benevolent benefactor and the Daltons as stubborn obstacles to progress. He made it sound reasonable. Just one small strip of land, compensation offered, benefits for everyone. He made it sound like Reeves was being selfish by refusing. Alara felt anger building with every slick word. This was her father's courtroom all over again, truth being twisted by someone skilled at manipulation. When Hastings finally finished, the mayor, a weathered man named Briggs, cleared his throat. "That's the railroad's position. Reeves Dalton, you got something to say?" Reeves stood, and Alara saw tension in every line of his body. "I do. The railroad's claim is based on a fraudulent deed. They're trying to steal land my father legally claimed and built his life on. Miss Winslow has evidence that proves their documents are fake." Hastings' smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. "Miss Winslow? The recently arrived mail-order bride? I hardly think she's qualified to evaluate complex legal matters." The dismissal in his tone made Alara's blood boil. She stood before she could second-guess herself. "Actually, Mr. Hastings, I'm quite qualified. My father was a lawyer in Boston for 30 years. I was educated in legal analysis and have spent considerable time studying your company's claims. Would you like me to explain the problems I found?" The room went silent. Hastings' smile finally faltered. "That won't be necessary." "I disagree. I think it's very necessary." Alara moved to the front, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "The railroad's case rests on a deed allegedly signed by Jeremiah Pike in March 1868. This deed, they claim, predates the Dalton claim and therefore takes precedence. There's just one problem. The deed is a forgery." She had their attention now. Every eye was fixed on her. She pulled out the documents she'd prepared, holding them up so people could see. The Pike deed references the Broken Creek Township Survey of 1867. But the township wasn't officially surveyed until 1869, 2 years after this deed was supposedly created. The deed couldn't reference a survey that didn't exist. She moved to the next page. Furthermore, the legal phrasing used in the document includes terminology that didn't enter common usage until the 1870s. And perhaps most damning, there is no record of Jeremiah Pike ever existing. No birth certificate, no death certificate, no other property holdings. He's a fictional person created to facilitate theft. "These are just theories," Hastings interjected, but his smooth confidence was cracking. "Speculation from someone with no legal standing." "I can provide documentation for every claim I've made." Alara's voice cut through his objection. "The territorial survey records are public. The historical legal texts are accessible to anyone who cares to check. And the absence of Jeremiah Pike from all official records is easily verifiable. These aren't theories, Mr. Hastings. They're facts. And they prove your company is attempting to steal land through forged documents." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding explanations. Mayor Briggs had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Winslow," Briggs said when the noise finally died down. "It's a serious crime Mr. Hastings is attempting, Mayor." She met his eyes steadily. "The Daltons have been part of this community for decades. They've built something honest through hard work. The railroad wants to take that through fraud and legal manipulation. I think the people of Broken Creek should know what kind of company they're being asked to support." "This is absurd," Hastings said, but his voice had lost its smooth assurance. The railroad has acted in complete good faith. Then explain the survey discrepancy, Alara challenged. Explain how a deed signed in 1868 references a survey conducted in 1869. Explain why Jeremiah Pike exists nowhere except in your convenient paperwork. Hastings opened his mouth, closed it, then gathered his documents with barely controlled anger. This matter will be settled in court, where emotional appeals and frontier theatrics won't sway judgment. Good evening. He strode out, leaving uncertain murmuring in his wake. Mayor Briggs studied Alara with something approaching respect. Well, that was interesting. Miss Winslow, you sure you're not a lawyer yourself? I'm my father's daughter. That's close enough. After the meeting dispersed, several townspeople approached Reeves with words of support. Mrs. Patterson from the general store squeezed Alara's hand. You did good, honey. Real good. That railroad snake won't find it so easy now. On the ride home, Reeves was quiet. Alara couldn't read his mood in the darkness, couldn't tell if he was pleased or angry or something else entirely. Did I overstep? She asked finally. I didn't ask permission before. You were perfect. His voice was rough. You stood up in front of everyone and eviscerated his case without even raising your voice. That took guts I'm not sure I have. You would have done the same if you'd had the information. Maybe, but I wouldn't have done it half as well. He was quiet a moment. You called yourself my father's daughter back there, but you're more than that. You're your own person, with your own strength. I see that now. Something warm unfurled in Alara's chest. The fight's not over. Hastings will regroup, find new angles. He won't give up easily. Neither will we. Reeves glanced at her in the darkness. You said we. Does that mean you're staying past your 3-month agreement? She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't consciously made the decision, but sitting beside him in the darkness, watching stars wheel overhead in the vast Wyoming sky, she realized something had shifted. I might be persuaded, she said carefully, if the situation warrants it. The situation definitely warrants it. His tone was light, but she heard the hope underneath. Ranch still needs a housekeeper who can make coffee that doesn't strip paint. And apparently, we need a legal advisor who can demolish railroad lawyers in public forums. Those are practical reasons. I'm a practical man. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. But if I'm being honest, I'd want you to stay even if you couldn't cook and knew nothing about law. You fit here, Alara. Don't know when it happened, but you do. The ranch feels different with you in it. Better, like it's actually a home, instead of just a place I work myself to death. Alara's breath caught. This was as close to a declaration as Reeves Dalton probably got. Awkward, honest, stripped of pretty words, but somehow perfect because of it. I fit here, she repeated softly. That's the strangest compliment anyone's ever given me, and also possibly the best. They rode in silence for a while, but it was comfortable now, charged with new understanding. When they finally reached the ranch, Reeves helped her down from the wagon with his usual care, but this time his hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, he said, for today, for all of it. You're welcome. She looked up at him, at the stars reflecting in his dark eyes. And Reeves? I think I might stay past 3 months, just so you know. His smile, rare and genuine, transformed his face. Good. That's real good. That night, a storm rolled in, one of those violent Wyoming tempests that turned the sky into something biblical. Lightning cracked with enough force to shake the house. Thunder followed seconds later, sound so deep it vibrated in her bones. Rain hammered the roof like it was trying to break through. Alara stood at her window watching nature's fury, feeling oddly calm despite the violence outside. This was Wyoming, harsh, unforgiving, but also magnificent in its own terrible way. She was beginning to understand why people stayed here despite the hardship. There was a raw honesty to this land that softened places lacked. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Reeves, his hair damp, his expression concerned. Just checking you're all right. These storms can be frightening if you're not used to them. I'm fine. Actually, I find it rather beautiful in a terrifying way. He leaned against the door frame and lightning illuminated his face in stark relief. Yeah, that's how I've always thought of it too. beautiful and terrifying at the same time, kind of like this whole territory. Kind of like this whole situation, Alara said softly. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Recognition, attraction, the acknowledgement of feelings they'd both been carefully not naming. Alara, he started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Thunder crashed, filling the silence. When it faded, he tried again. I know I'm not what you expected, not educated or refined or any of the things Thomas promised you. I'm just a cowboy trying to keep a failing ranch alive against impossible odds. But you're honest, she interrupted. You're strong. You care about this land and the people who depend on you. You've been kind to me when you had no obligation to be. Those things matter more than education or refinement. Do they? He took a step closer, and her heart began racing. Because I've been thinking lately that maybe what happened with Thomas dying wasn't the disaster I thought it was. Maybe it was another crash of thunder, this one so close, it felt like the world splitting open. The house shuddered, and in that moment of violence and noise, Reeves's control finally broke. Hell with it, he muttered, and then his hands were framing her face and his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd imagined in her romantic fantasies back in Boston. It was fierce, desperate, full of weeks of tension finally finding release. His stubble scraped her skin. His hands were rough and calloused. He tasted like coffee and rain and something indefinably him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, lightning lit the room in stuttering flashes. Reeves pressed his forehead to hers. I'm sorry, he said roughly. I shouldn't have. I had no right. Reeves. She gripped his shirt to keep him from pulling away. If you apologize for that, I'll never forgive you. He laughed, a sound of relief and wonder. Not apologizing then, just trying to figure out what happens now. Now we figure out how to save your ranch from the railroad. Everything else can wait. Can it? His thumb traced her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. Because I've been going crazy trying not to think about you, trying not to notice how you fit here, how you make this place feel like something worth fighting for beyond just duty. And after tonight, after watching you demolish Hastings in front of the whole town, attachment gets a man killed out here, Alara. I swore I'd never let myself care about anything the land could take away, but losing you would be worse than anything Wyoming could throw at me. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something new and fragile was being born. I'm not going anywhere, Alara whispered, not unless you send me away. Never. The word was fierce. You're staying, and we're fighting the railroad, and we're going to figure out whatever this is between us. Together. Together, she agreed. He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. When he finally stepped back, his eyes were dark with promise and restraint. I should go. Let you sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Tomorrow's been complicated since I stepped off that stage. Fair point. He moved to the door, then looked back. Alara, I don't have pretty words like Thomas did. Don't know poetry or fancy phrases, but what I feel for you is real. Just wanted you to know that. After he left, Alara sat on her bed feeling like she'd been struck by lightning herself. Everything had changed in a single evening. The ranch's prospects, her relationship with Reeves, her entire future. Outside, the storm gradually spent itself, thunder growing distant, rain softening to steady patter. And somewhere in the house below, Reeves was probably lying awake with the same mixture of hope and terror that kept her from sleeping. They'd exposed the railroad's fraud, but the real battle was just beginning. And somewhere along the way, she'd gone from reluctant housekeeper to something else entirely, partner, ally, and possibly something more that neither of them had the courage to name yet. But that was fine. They had time. They had determination, and they had each other. In the harsh Wyoming night, that felt like enough. Morning brought clarity and complications in equal measure. Alara woke to find herself replaying the previous night in vivid detail. The storm, the confrontation at the town meeting, and most of all, that kiss. Her fingers touched her lips absently, still feeling the ghost of Reeves's mouth on hers. She'd been kissed before, chaste and proper advances from Boston gentlemen who'd courted her with her parents' approval. None of those careful encounters had prepared her for the raw intensity of Reeves Dalton kissing her like she was air and he was drowning. She dressed quickly, nerves making her fingers clumsy with buttons. What happened now? Did they pretend nothing had changed? Did they acknowledge it? She had no frame of reference for this situation. Her mother had never prepared her for falling in love with a rough-edged cowboy 2,000 miles from civilization. The thought stopped her cold. Falling in love. Was that what this was? She forced herself downstairs, following the sound of voices to find the kitchen already occupied. The cowboys were gathered around the table in unusual silence, their expressions grave. Reeves stood by the window, his posture radiating tension even from behind. "What's wrong?" Alara asked, and every head turned toward her. Reeves's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, but his voice when he spoke was carefully neutral. "Railroad's not backing down. Got word this morning they're pushing for an emergency court hearing tomorrow in Cheyenne. Judge they've got is known for favoring big companies over individual claims." "Tomorrow?" Alara moved to the table, her mind already racing through implications. "That's not enough time to prepare a proper defense." "It's not meant to be. They're trying to ram this through before we can build a solid case." Sam's weathered face was tight with worry. "Hastings is betting that public embarrassment last night won't matter if they get a legal judgment fast enough." "We should go to Cheyenne," Alara said immediately. "Present the evidence directly to the judge. Make it impossible for him to ignore the fraud." "It's a 2-day ride," Reeves said, still not looking at her directly. "And there's no guarantee the judge will even let us speak. Hastings has probably already paid him off." "So we do nothing?" Alara heard her voice rise with frustration. "We just let them steal your family's land because the system is rigged?" "I didn't say that." Now Reeves did look at her, and something fierce burned in his dark eyes. "I said there's no guarantee. But you're right, we have to try. I'll ride to Cheyenne today, get there by tomorrow morning, and do whatever it takes to make that judge listen." "I'm coming with you." The room went silent. Reeves's expression shifted to something between concern and refusal. "Alara, it's a hard ride. 2 days through rough country, camping overnight. You're not—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence with 'not capable,'" she warned, her tone sharp enough to cut. "I've proven I can handle difficult things. I'm coming with you, and that's final." "She's got a point, boss," Billy ventured carefully. "Miss Alara knows all the legal details better than anyone. Might help having her there to explain things directly to the judge." Reeves's jaw tightened, and Alara could see him fighting between practicality and protectiveness. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. But we leave in an hour, and I won't slow down for complaints. Can you ride?" "I told you before, I can't, but I can learn quickly when necessary." "An hour isn't enough time to learn to ride," Reeves said flatly. "You'll ride with me. It'll be uncomfortable, but it's the only option." The thought of spending 2 days pressed against Reeves on horseback made Alara's face heat, but she kept her expression composed. "That's acceptable." Sam cleared his throat. "Boss, you want me to manage things here while you're gone?" "Yeah, keep the men working the usual rotation. If anything urgent comes up, use your judgment. I trust you." Reeves moved toward the door, then paused. "And Sam, if anyone from the railroad shows up while I'm gone, you don't let them pass the property line. I don't care what papers they're waving or what threats they make. This is still my land until a judge says otherwise." After the men dispersed to their work, Alara found herself alone in the kitchen with Reeves. The air felt charged, heavy with everything they hadn't said. He moved to the coffee pot, poured 2 cups with hands that were remarkably steady considering the tension radiating from him. "About last night," he started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "If you're going to apologize again, don't." Alara accepted the coffee he offered. "I meant what I said. I'm not sorry it happened." "I'm not sorry either." He leaned against the counter, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "But it complicates things. We've got enough to deal with without adding whatever this is between us." "So what are you suggesting? That we pretend it didn't happen?" "I'm suggesting we table it until after we've dealt with the railroad. Once that's settled, once we know whether I even still have a ranch," he set down his cup with more force than necessary. "I can't think straight around you, Alara. And I need to think straight right now. Too much is riding on the next 48 hours. It stung, even though she understood the logic. Fine. We focus on the railroad. But Reeves, this conversation isn't over. When this is done, we're going to talk about what happened. Yeah. His voice was rough. We will, I promise. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Elara changed into her most practical dress, still woefully inadequate for the journey ahead, and packed a small bag with essentials. She found a wide-brimmed hat that had belonged to Thomas, dusty but functional, and commandeered it without guilt. The sun was brutal, and vanity had no place on a desperate ride to save the ranch. Reeves was waiting by the barn with a massive dark horse that looked like it could run forever without tiring. He'd packed supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times: bedrolls, food, water, and carefully wrapped legal documents that represented their entire case. This is Midnight, Reeves said, running a hand along the horse's neck with obvious affection. He's got stamina and sense. He'll get us there safely. He turned to Elara, his expression serious. I'm going to lift you up first, then mount behind you. You'll need to sit side saddle. Your skirts won't allow anything else. It's going to be uncomfortable, and you'll be pressed against me for hours. If that's a problem, it's not a problem. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Let's go. He lifted her easily, his hand strong on her waist, and settled her onto the saddle. Then he swung up behind her with fluid grace, his body solid and warm against her back. His arms came around her to grip the reins, effectively caging her in. She could feel his heartbeat, smell the sun and leather scent of him, feel the controlled strength in every line of his body. Ready? His voice was close to her ear, sending involuntary shivers down her spine. Ready. Midnight moved forward at Reeves's command, and Elara had to grab the saddle horn to keep her balance. The ground seemed impossibly far below. The horse's movement was nothing like the gentle carriage ride she'd experienced in Boston. This was power and motion and danger, all rolled together. Relax, Reeves murmured. You're stiff as a board. Trust Midnight. Trust me. We won't let you fall. She forced herself to breathe, to release some of the tension. Gradually, she found a rhythm with the horse's gait, learned to move with it instead of fighting it. Reeves's body behind hers was warm and steady, an anchor in the disorienting motion. They rode hard, pushing north across open country that seemed to stretch forever. The landscape was harsh beauty, rolling grasslands punctuated by rocky outcroppings, distant mountains purple against the horizon, sky so vast and blue it hurt to look at. Birds wheeled overhead. Once they startled a herd of pronghorn that bounded away with impossible speed. It's beautiful, Elara said after hours of silence broken only by hoofbeats and wind. It is. Reeves's voice held something she couldn't identify. Most people never see it, though. They just see the harshness, the danger. They miss what's worth protecting. Like your father did. He saw it. Yeah, he loved this land like some men love women, completely, despite the pain it caused him. Told me once that Wyoming took his wife but gave him purpose. Don't know if that's a fair trade, but it's what kept him going. Elara thought about that as they rode, loving something that could hurt you, choosing it anyway because the alternative was worse. It felt relevant to more than just land. They stopped briefly at midday to water the horse and eat dried beef that tasted like leather but provided necessary energy. Elara's legs were already aching, her back sore from the unfamiliar position. But she didn't complain. Reeves watched her with something like concern, but also approval. You're tougher than you look, he said, offering her water from a canteen. I'm motivated. There's a difference. No, you're tough. Motivated people give up when things get hard. Tough people push through anyway. He took a drink himself, then capped the canteen. You've surprised me, Elara. Keep surprising me. That's not something that happens often. They mounted again and continued north. The afternoon sun was merciless, and Elara was grateful for Thomas's borrowed hat. Sweat soaked through her dress, dust caked her skin. Every muscle screamed protest, but she set her jaw and endured, determined not to be the weak link. As evening approached, the landscape began to change. Trees appeared, sparse at first, then gradually more frequent. A creek wound through a small valley, its water glinting in the fading light. We'll make camp here, Reeves said, guiding Midnight toward the creek. It's good shelter, and the water's clean. We can rest a few hours, then push on before dawn. He dismounted first, then lifted Alara down. Her legs nearly buckled when they hit solid ground. They'd gone numb from hours in the saddle. Reeves caught her automatically, his hand steadying her. Easy, give yourself a minute. Feeling will come back, though you might wish it wouldn't. The pain's worse than the numbness. He was right. As circulation returned, her legs burned with pins and needles that made her gasp. Reeves kept his hands on her waist until she could stand independently, his touch impersonal, but somehow intimate nonetheless. I'll tend to midnight and set up camp. There's a spot by those rocks where you can wash up if you want. Water's going to be cold, but it'll help with the soreness. Alara made her way to the creek on unsteady legs, grateful for a moment alone. She removed her boots and stockings, gasping as icy water hit her feet. But Reeves was right. The cold was shocking, but also healing. Reducing the inflammation in muscles worked far beyond their normal limits. She washed her face and arms, scrubbing away layers of dust, and felt almost human again. When she returned to camp, Reeves had accomplished miracles. A small fire crackled cheerfully. Bedrolls were laid out with careful distance between them. Midnight was unsaddled and grazing peacefully nearby. "Coffee's heating," Reeves said, not looking up from whatever he was doing with their food supplies. "And I've got beans and bacon. Not fancy, but it'll keep us going." They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. The food was simple but surprisingly good, or maybe everything tasted good when you'd been riding for 10 hours straight. Alara found herself watching Reeves in the firelight, studying the strong lines of his face, the capable movement of his hands. He'd rolled his sleeves to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scattered with scars that told stories she didn't know yet. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "Is there?" Now he did look at her, and something heated passed between them. "What are you observing?" "That you're completely in your element out here. You move differently, speak differently, like the weight you carry at the ranch doesn't exist here." He considered that, poking at the fire. "Out here, it's simple, just survival, just basics. At the ranch, there's complications, responsibilities, expectations, the constant pressure of trying to keep everything from falling apart." He met her eyes across the flames. "You're one of those complications, you know, the best kind, but still. I don't mean to complicate your life." "Yes, you do." He said it without heat. "And I let you. That's the thing. I could have left you in Broken Creek, could have kept you at arm's length once you came to the ranch, but I didn't. Couldn't, maybe. You got under my skin from that first day, with your fancy dresses and your determination not to show weakness. You were scared, but trying so damn hard not to be. And something about that—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Alara's heart was beating too fast. "Something about that what?" she pressed. "Made me want to keep you safe. Which is stupid, because you don't need keeping safe. You need space to prove how strong you already are." He stood abruptly, moving to check on Midnight with the restless energy of someone avoiding difficult feelings. "We should sleep. We've got maybe 4 hours before we need to ride again." Alara wanted to push, to make him finish what he'd started to say, but exhaustion was pulling at her with irresistible force. She moved to her bedroll, discovering that lying down after hours on horseback brought entirely new dimensions of pain. "You'll be sore tomorrow," Reeves said from his own bedroll, positioned a careful 10 feet away. Nothing for it but to push through. "But Alara, you did good today. Real good." She smiled into the darkness. High praise from Reeves Dalton. It's honest praise, which is the only kind I know how to give. Well, the night sounds of Wyoming surrounded them. Creek water, crackling fire, distant coyote calls that no longer frightened her the way they had those first nights at the ranch. Above, stars wheeled in patterns her father had taught her to read once, in a different life. Cassiopeia, Ursa Major, Orion stalking across the southern sky. "Reeves?" she said into the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you for letting me come, for trusting me with this." "Wasn't about trust, it was about needing you here." His voice was rough. "Now sleep. Tomorrow's going to be harder than today." She woke what felt like minutes later to Reeves shaking her shoulder gently. "Time to move. Dawn's still an hour off, but we need the head start." They broke camp in darkness, working by feel and firelight. Alara's body screamed protest with every movement, muscles she didn't know she had announcing their displeasure. But she forced herself upright, forced her hands to work through the stiffness, forced her legs to hold her weight. Mounting was agony. Sitting in the saddle was worse. But as midnight began to move and blood started flowing again, the pain gradually ebbed to manageable discomfort. They rode through the pre-dawn darkness, Reeves navigating by stars and instinct. Gradually, the sky lightened from black to gray to pale gold. Sunrise over Wyoming was a spectacle that made Alara catch her breath. The whole world igniting with color, shadows retreating, land revealing itself in all its harsh glory. "Never gets old," Reeves said quietly. "Seeing this makes me understand why my father stayed even after losing my mother. This land gives you something cities never could." "What's that?" "Perspective. Out here, you remember you're small, all your problems, all your worries. They matter to you, but the land doesn't care. It was here before you. It'll be here after. Something about that is freeing." They rode in contemplative silence, pushing hard through morning into afternoon. The landscape gradually shifted, more towns appearing in the distance, more farms, signs of civilization creeping in. They were approaching Cheyenne, approaching judgment. "Tell me about your father," Alara said, needing distraction from her aching body. "The man who built the ranch." Reeves was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "He was hard. Had to be. Wyoming doesn't suffer soft men. But he was fair, honest to a fault. Taught me and Thomas that a man's word is his bond, that you treat people right even when it costs you." He paused. "He loved my mother deeply. When she died giving birth to Thomas, something broke in him. He kept going because he had 2 boys to raise, but the joy went out of him. He built the ranch as a monument to her memory. Every fence post, every building, every acre claimed was him proving her death meant something." "That's a heavy burden to carry." "It is. And now it's mine. If I lose the ranch to the railroad, it's not just land I'm losing. It's the physical manifestation of my father's love and grief. It's Thomas's grave on the North Hill. It's every sacrifice my family made for 3 generations. His arms tightened around her. "So no, I can't be rational about this. And yes, I'm willing to fight dirty if necessary. That land is mine by right of blood and sacrifice, and I'll be damned if some railroad company takes it with forged documents." The intensity in his voice made Alara's throat tight. "We'll stop them. I promise you, Reeves. We'll find a way." "You can't promise that, but I appreciate you trying." Cheyenne appeared on the horizon just after noon, a real town, bigger than Broken Creek, with actual streets and multiple-story buildings. Alara felt oddly disconnected from it, like civilization was now foreign after weeks on the ranch. They found a boarding house that looked marginally respectable. The landlady's eyes widened at their dust-covered, travel-worn appearance, but Reeves's money convinced her to provide 2 rooms despite her clear suspicions about their relationship. "Court hearings at 2:00, Reeves said, standing awkwardly in the hallway between their rooms. "That gives us an hour to clean up and get our arguments straight." "I'll be ready." Alara paused at her door. "Reeves? Whatever happens in that courtroom, we face it together. You're not alone in this." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability breaking through the hard exterior. "I've been alone since Thomas died. Forgot what it felt like to have someone on my side. So thank you for that. Even if we lose, thank you." He left before she could respond, disappearing into his room. Alara used the pitcher and basin to wash away as much trail dust as possible, then changed into the only clean dress she'd brought, dark gray, practical, but at least not visibly filthy. She pinned up her hair with trembling hands, trying to look professional despite exhaustion and fear. The courthouse was an imposing stone building that radiated official authority. Inside, it smelled of wood polish and old paper, familiar scents that reminded Alara of her father's office. She drew strength from that memory, her father facing down injustice, armed only with facts and determination. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, already occupied by Marcus Hastings and 2 other men in expensive suits. They looked confident, assured, like this was merely formality. Hastings' eyes narrowed when he saw Alara and Reeves enter. "Mr. Dalton, Miss Winslow, how unexpected." His tone said it was anything but. I didn't realize the defendant would be bringing his housekeeper to legal proceedings. Miss Winslow is my legal advisor, Reeves said flatly. She has every right to be here. The judge entered before Hastings could respond, a heavy-set man with gray mutton chops and eyes that suggested he'd seen everything twice and been unimpressed both times. Judge Crawford, protectiveness, according to the nameplate on his bench. This is a hearing regarding land dispute between Western Continental Railroad Company and Reeves Dalton, owner of the Dalton Ranch. Mr. Hastings, you've petitioned for emergency judgment? Yes, Your Honor. The railroad has shown clear precedent for land ownership predating Mr. Dalton's claim. We ask that you rule in our favor and allow us to proceed with necessary development. Mr. Dalton, your response? Reeves stood, his jaw tight. The railroad's claim is based on fraudulent documents, Your Honor. We have evidence proving their so-called precedent is fabricated. Crawford's eyebrows rose. That's a serious accusation. What evidence? This was the moment. Elara stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. Your Honor, may I present our findings? I've conducted extensive analysis of the railroad's documentation and found multiple inconsistencies that prove fraud. And you are? Elara Winslow, Your Honor. My father was attorney James Winslow of Boston. I've been trained in legal analysis and document authentication. Something flickered in Crawford's expression. Interest maybe, or recognition of her father's name. Very well, Miss Winslow. Present your evidence. She moved forward, laying out the documents with hands that had steadied now that she was in familiar territory. This was her courtroom, her battle. She explained the survey discrepancy, the anachronistic language, the non-existent Jeremiah Pike. She spoke clearly, concisely, building her case with the precision her father had taught her. Hastings tried to interrupt several times, but Crawford silenced him with sharp looks. When Elara finished, the courtroom was silent. Your Honor, Hastings said, recovering his smooth tone, this is merely speculation from someone with no legal standing. The railroad's documents have been verified by multiple sources. Sources you've paid, Elara interjected. Your Honor, I can provide independent verification of every claim I've made. The territorial survey records are public documents. The historical legal texts are available in any law library. This isn't speculation, it's documented fact. Crawford leaned back, studying both parties. Mr. Hastings, can you explain the survey discrepancy Miss Winslow has identified? It's likely a clerical error that references a survey conducted a year after the deed was supposedly signed. Crawford's voice had gone cold. That's not clerical error. That's either gross incompetence or deliberate fraud. Hastings' smooth facade was cracking. Your Honor, with all respect, we have multiple witnesses who can attest to what? The existence of a man who appears in no official records? The validity of a document that contains impossible references? Crawford shuffled through the papers before him. I've presided over many cases involving railroad expansion, Mr. Hastings. I've seen companies use questionable tactics before, but this, he tapped the Pike deed, this is insulting. Did you honestly think no one would check these details? The railroad has acted in complete good faith. The railroad has attempted to steal land through forged documents. Crawford's voice rang with authority. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Dalton. The railroad's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm recommending investigation into possible criminal fraud charges against your company. The words hung in the air like thunder. Elara felt Reeves go rigid beside her, heard his sharp intake of breath. They'd won. Against all odds, against a system rigged in the railroad's favor, they'd actually won. Hastings was sputtering protests, but Crawford had already stood, signaling the hearing's end. My decision is final. Good day, gentlemen. Miss Winslow. Outside the courthouse, Reeves stood on the steps looking dazed. Did that actually just happen? We won. Elara's voice was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Reeves, we won. The ranch is safe. He turned to her, and his expression was so raw it made her chest ache. You did that. You saved my family's legacy with legal knowledge and pure determination. Elara, I don't know how to... I can't... He pulled her into his arms right there on the courthouse steps, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him trembling, felt the moment when relief overwhelmed his iron control. When he finally released her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said roughly, "for everything. For coming to Wyoming, for staying, for fighting when you had no reason to. Thank you." "I had every reason," she said softly. "The ranch is my home too now, and you—" She stopped, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through. "And me?" he prompted, his voice dropping lower. "You've become important to me, more than important. I can't imagine leaving, can't imagine going back to Boston and pretending this never happened." She met his eyes directly. "I know we said we'd table this conversation until after the railroad situation was resolved. Well, it's resolved now. So I'm telling you, I'm staying. Not as a temporary housekeeper, but as whatever we decide we are to each other." Reeves's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "Alara Winslow, you walked into my life at its worst moment and somehow made everything better. You're strong and smart and stubborn as hell. You fit in Wyoming better than people who were born here. And I'm falling in love with you if I'm not already all the way gone. So if you're staying, if you're willing to build something with me on that harsh land, then I'm the luckiest man in the territory." "You're in love with me?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yeah." He said it simply, honestly. "Didn't plan on it. Didn't want it, honestly. Love means vulnerability. And vulnerability gets you killed out here. But you made me believe some things are worth the risk. You're worth the risk." Alara felt tears burning behind her eyes. Not sad tears, but the overwhelming emotion of finding something she hadn't known she was searching for. "I love you too. I think I started falling that first day, when you met my stage with bad news and hard truth instead of pretty lies. You've been real with me from the beginning, and that's everything." He kissed her then, right there on the courthouse steps with people passing by and staring. It was different from the desperate kiss during the storm. This was promise and hope, and the beginning of something new. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he was smiling in a way she'd never seen before. "So," he said, "I'm thinking I should probably do this properly. Ask you to marry me instead of just assuming." "Are you asking?" "I'm asking. Alara Winslow, will you marry me? Will you stay in Wyoming and build a life with me on land that tries to kill you half the time? Will you be my partner in every sense, running the ranch, fighting whatever comes next, growing old together under that impossible sky?" It wasn't poetry. It wasn't the refined proposal she'd once imagined receiving in some Boston parlor. It was rough and honest and perfect. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. I came to Wyoming expecting a gentleman, and I got you instead. A rough cowboy with no pretty words but more integrity than anyone I've ever met. That's a trait I'll take any day." He laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "No pretty words. That's going in our marriage vows for sure." They rode back to the ranch the next day, taking their time now that urgency had lifted. They camped again that night, but this time they talked for hours about future plans, improvements to the house, expansion of the cattle operation, maybe hiring more men now that the railroad threat was eliminated. They talked about children someday, about building something that would last generations the way Reeves's father had dreamed. And when they finally lay down to sleep, Reeves pulled her close against him, her back to his chest, his arms wrapped around her protectively. "I don't deserve you," he murmured into her hair. "Yes, you do. And I don't deserve this life. It's harder and stranger than anything I imagined. But we deserve each other, and that's what matters." "Yeah," he agreed softly. "That's what matters." They arrived at the ranch just after noon to find the cowboys gathered near the house, clearly watching for their return. The moment midnight crested the final hill, a cheer went up. "Boss, Miss Alara!" Billy came running, his young face split in a grin. "Did you do it? Did you beat the railroad?" "We did," Reeves said, swinging down from the saddle. "Ranch is safe. The judge ruled in our favor and recommended fraud charges against Western Continental." Another cheer, this one louder. Sam clapped Reeves on the shoulder with genuine affection. "Knew you'd figure it out, both of you." "It was mostly Alara," Reeves said, lifting her down from the horse. "She's the one who found the proof we needed." "Then I guess we should get used to having her around," Sam said, his weathered face creasing in a rare smile. "You are staying, right, Miss Alara?" "I'm staying," she confirmed. "Actually, I have an announcement. Reeves and I are getting married." The cowboys erupted in celebration, whooping, hat-throwing, general chaos. Billy looked like he might actually cry from happiness. Even old Pete cracked a smile. "About damn time," Jack said. "We've been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Thought we'd have to lock you in a barn until you figured it out." Reeves's arm came around Alara's waist, pulling her against his side. "Well, we figured it out. So you can all stop gossiping like old women." "Never," Billy promised cheerfully. "Wait until we tell everyone in Broken Creek, the mail-order bride and the rough cowboy. It's like something out of a dime novel." That evening, after the celebration had quieted and the cowboys had returned to the bunkhouse, Alara and Reeves found themselves on the porch, their spot, the place where everything had slowly shifted from hostility to friendship to something far deeper. "Can't believe this is real," Reeves said, pulling her close against his side. 2 months ago, I was barely holding this place together, grieving my brother, convinced I'd lost everything that mattered. Now you have a future," Alara finished. "We have a future together." Thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm rolling in because this was Wyoming and storms were inevitable. But Alara no longer feared them. She'd learned that storms passed, that what was built on solid foundation could weather any tempest. "Life didn't give me what I expected," Reeves said softly, echoing words he'd spoken weeks ago. Alara smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It gave you what you needed." Lightning cracked across the darkening sky, illuminating the land they'd fought to protect. And in that flash of light, two people from impossible different worlds held each other close, ready to face whatever came next, together. The storm that night was different from all the others Alara had experienced since arriving in Wyoming. She stood at her bedroom window watching lightning split the sky. But instead of feeling small and vulnerable, she felt anchored, grounded. This land no longer terrified her. It challenged her, tested her, but she'd proven she could meet it on its own terms. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Reeves stood in the hallway, his hair damp from rain, his expression uncertain in a way she rarely saw. "Couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Kept thinking about everything that's happened, everything that could have gone wrong. And I needed to see you, make sure this is real." Alara crossed to him, taking his hand and pulling him into the room. It was improper by Boston standards, scandalous even, but those rules felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. "It's real. We're real. The ranch is safe, and we're getting married. That's as real as anything gets." He cupped her face with both hands, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheekbones with impossible gentleness. "I want to do this right, not rush into marriage because it's convenient or practical. I want to court you properly, give you time to be absolutely certain this is what you want." "Reeves Dalton, I rode 2 days on horseback to save your ranch. I stood up in front of a judge and demolished a railroad company's fraudulent case. I've scrubbed floors, learned to cook for 9 hungry men, and stitched up your hand with thread and determination. If that's not certainty, I don't know what is." He laughed, the sound rough with emotion. "Fair point. But still, I want to marry you the right way. With a proper ceremony, witnesses, the whole town there to see. I want everyone to know you chose this life, chose me, with full knowledge of what you were getting into. Then we'll do it properly." She rose on her toes to kiss him softly. "But Reeves, don't make me wait too long. I've never been particularly patient." "No," he agreed, his arms coming around her waist. "You really haven't. It's one of the things I love about you." They stood together as the storm raged outside, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and somehow made it work through sheer, stubborn determination. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. News of the court victory spread through Broken Creek like wildfire, and suddenly the town that had been coolly indifferent to Alara's arrival was eager to embrace her. Mrs. Patterson insisted on helping plan the wedding, recruiting half the women in town to contribute. The church, that weathered building Alara had barely noticed on her first day, was cleaned and decorated with late-season wildflowers. "You've become quite the celebrity," Billy said one morning at breakfast, grinning over his coffee. "Heard folks in town calling you the lady who beat the railroad." They're treating you like some kind of hero. All I did was read documents carefully, Elara protested, though she felt pleased despite herself. You did more than that, Sam said seriously. You stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to walk away. That matters to people here. Wyoming respects guts more than anything else, and you've got plenty. Reeves caught her eye across the table, his expression warm with pride and something deeper. They'd maintained propriety since returning from Cheyenne. Separate rooms, careful distance in public, but the tension between them was palpable. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, carried the weight of promises yet to be fulfilled. Planning a frontier wedding proved both simpler and more complicated than Elara expected. There were no elaborate preparations, no months of coordination. But there were practical considerations she'd never imagined, making sure there was enough food to feed everyone who'd come, finding a dress that was both appropriate and achievable given limited resources, figuring out where everyone would sleep since people would travel from distant ranches. I could wear my gray dress, Elara suggested to Mrs. Patterson one afternoon. They were in the general store, ostensibly looking at fabric, but really just talking. It's practical, and I already own it. Mrs. Patterson looked scandalized. Absolutely not. You're marrying one of our own, in our church, and you'll do it properly. I've got some fabric that came in last month, beautiful cream-colored cotton. Not silk, mind you, but we're not in Boston. It'll make a dress fine enough for any bride. I don't want to impose. It's not imposing when I'm offering. Mrs. Patterson pulled out a bolt of fabric that was indeed lovely, soft cream cotton with a subtle texture. Besides, the whole town's invested in this wedding now. You and Reeves gave us something to celebrate. Let us do this for you. Elara felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. These people, who'd been strangers mere months ago, had welcomed her as one of their own. She was no longer the out-of-place Boston girl. She was part of the community, part of Wyoming itself. The dress came together through the combined efforts of several women, each contributing skills. Mrs. Patterson cut the pattern. The seamstress from the boarding house did the detailed work. Even the blacksmith's wife, who apparently had a gift for embroidery, added delicate details to the bodice. When Elara finally tried on the finished garment, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was no longer the refined city girl who'd stepped off the stage in complete silk and rigid corsets. This woman's skin was sun-kissed. Her hands showed the marks of hard work. Her eyes held confidence earned through proving herself again and again. The dress was simpler than anything she'd have worn in Boston, but somehow it suited this new version of herself perfectly. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said, her usually practical voice going soft. "Reeves is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Elara corrected. "He gave me a chance when he had no obligation to. He trusted me when I had no credentials. He let me become part of something meaningful instead of leaving me stranded." "He fell in love with you," Mrs. Patterson said bluntly. "Rest of us saw it happening weeks before you two figured it out. The way he'd watch you when he thought no one was looking, the way he'd find excuses to check on you during the day. Man was gone from the start, just too stubborn to admit it." Meanwhile, at the ranch, preparations of a different sort were underway. Reeves had enlisted the Cowboys to help repair and improve the house, tackling projects that had been neglected for years. They fixed the sagging porch, replaced broken shutters, patched the roof where rain had been leaking through. The house that had seemed so dilapidated when Elara first arrived was transforming into something that actually felt like a home. "Boss is nesting," Jack said with a grin, watching Reeves meticulously repair a window frame. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Shut up and hand me that hammer," Reeves replied, but there was no heat in it. He'd been in remarkably good spirits lately, the constant tension that had characterized him when Elara first arrived finally easing. One evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Reeves asked Elara to ride with him to the North Hill. She'd learned to ride properly now, still not gracefully, but competently enough to stay in the saddle without constant fear of falling. They rode in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in colors that still took her breath away. The North Hill overlooked the entire ranch, providing a vantage point that showed the full scope of what Reeves's father had built. From here, you could see the house, the barn, the corrals, the vast stretches of grazing land where cattle dotted the landscape like dark stones. It was beautiful in its harsh way. this empire carved from wilderness through determination and sacrifice. My father's buried here, Reeves said, dismounting and helping Alara down. And Thomas, next to him. I come up here when I need perspective, need to remember what matters. Alara saw the two simple markers, rough wooden crosses with names carved deep. James Dalton, died 1870. Thomas Dalton, died 1874. Father and son, reunited in Wyoming soil. I wanted to bring you here before the wedding, Reeves continued, his voice rough. Wanted you to meet them, in a way. Tell them about you, about what's happening. He crouched beside the graves, and Alara felt her chest tighten at the vulnerability in his posture. Pa, Thomas, this is Alara. She's the woman Thomas wrote to, the one who was supposed to marry him. But she's marrying me instead, and I hope that's okay. I hope you'd approve. He was quiet a moment, and Alara saw his shoulders tense. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. She saved the ranch, Pa. Saved it with her brain and her courage. Did what I couldn't have done alone. And she's choosing to stay here, choosing this hard life when she could go back to civilization. Thomas, I know you wanted her, and I'm sorry. But brother, I love her in a way I didn't think I was capable of anymore. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets choosing Wyoming, choosing me. Alara felt tears streaming down her face. She moved to stand beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. They'd be proud of you, of what you've built, what you've protected. And Reeves? I think Thomas would understand. I think he'd be happy we found each other. Reeves stood, pulling her into his arms and burying his face in her hair. I was so angry when he died. Angry at him for being reckless, angry at God for taking him, angry at the world for being so unfair. But if he hadn't died, you wouldn't be here. And that feels wrong to say, but it's true. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I only have you because I lost him. Life's strange that way, Alara said softly. We don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we respond. You chose to meet my stage when you could have let me fend for myself. You chose to offer me work when you could have sent me away. And I chose to stay, to fight for this place, to fall in love with a rough cowboy who shows his heart through actions instead of words. I do have some words, Reeves said, pulling back to look at her. Maybe not pretty ones, but they're honest. Alara, I promise I'll work every day to be worthy of your choice. I'll protect you, provide for you, stand beside you through whatever comes, and I'll love you until my last breath, with everything I am. That's all I need, she whispered. Your honesty, your strength, your love. That's more than enough. The wedding day arrived with Wyoming's typical unpredictability. Brilliant sunshine mixed with wind that threatened to blow away anything not nailed down. The church was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the back and spilling out onto the street. Every rancher within 50 miles had come, along with what seemed like the entire population of Broken Creek. Alara stood in a small room behind the church, smoothing her cream cotton dress with trembling hands. Mrs. Patterson fussed with her hair, which had been pinned up with wildflowers woven through the dark strands. You nervous? Mrs. Patterson asked. Terrified, Alara admitted. Not about marrying Reeves, I'm certain about that, but about all those people out there, watching, judging whether I'm good enough for one of their own. Honey, you beat the railroad in court. You've been keeping 7 cowboys fed without poisoning them. You've earned respect that usually takes years to build. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her shoulders. You belong here now. That's what today is really about. Not just marrying Reeves, but the community claiming you as one of us. A knock at the door revealed Sam, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes and a string tie. Miss Alara, it's time. And I'm supposed to walk you down the aisle if you'll have me. Reeves thought, since your father can't be here. Alara felt fresh tears threatening. I'd be honored. The church fell silent as she appeared in the doorway on Sam's arm. Every face turned toward her. Weathered ranchers, tough cowboys, townspeople who'd witnessed her journey from helpless stranger to capable woman. And at the front, standing beside the circuit preacher who'd ridden in specifically for this ceremony, was Reeves. He'd cleaned up remarkably well. Dark suit that must have been his father's. Hair actually combed, beard neatly trimmed. But it was his expression that made Alara's breath catch. He looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had never dared voice, like she was precious beyond measure, like he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Sam walked her down the short aisle, past pews packed with witnesses. When they reached the front, he placed her hand in Reeves's with a gravity that suggested he understood the significance of this moment. Then he stepped back, leaving them facing each other while the preacher began speaking words Alara barely heard. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." She focused on Reeves instead, on his dark eyes fixed on hers, on his strong hands holding hers gently, on the slight tremor that revealed he was as nervous as she was. This rough man who'd shown her more consideration and respect than any of the refined gentlemen who'd courted her in Boston. This honest man who'd given her purpose and partnership instead of pretty lies. This hard man who'd proven himself capable of breathtaking tenderness. "Do you, Reeves Dalton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was rough but certain. "I take her freely, gratefully, and I swear I'll spend every day proving she made the right choice." "And do you, Alara Winslow, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Alara smiled through tears. "I do. I take him knowing exactly who he is. No illusions, no false promises. Just honest partnership and true love. That's more than enough. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Dalton, you may kiss your bride." Reeves pulled her close with careful reverence, and the kiss he gave her was gentle despite the passion underneath, a promise of all the private moments to come, but appropriate for present company. When they broke apart to cheering and applause, Alara felt transformed. She was no longer Alara Winslow of Boston. She was Alara Dalton of Wyoming, and that identity fit her better than any she'd worn before. The celebration that followed was pure frontier exuberance. Tables had been set up outside the church laden with food everyone had contributed: roasted beef, fresh bread, pies and cakes of every variety. Someone produced a fiddle, another a guitar, and music filled the afternoon air. People danced in the street with complete disregard for propriety, spinning and laughing under that impossible sky. Alara found herself pulled into dance after dance, Billy whirling her around with youthful enthusiasm, Sam surprising her with unexpected grace, even old Pete managing a credible waltz. Reeves watched from the sidelines, his expression alternating between amusement and possessiveness, clearly eager to reclaim his bride. "You're popular," he said when she finally escaped back to his side, breathless and laughing. "It's my wedding day. They're being polite." "No, they love you, because you're lovable, and you've proven yourself in ways that matter here." He pulled her close, swaying to the music despite not officially dancing. "How long do we have to stay before we can leave?" "Reeves Dalton, are you eager to get your wife alone?" Desperately. His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. "Been waiting weeks to have you properly, to show you everything I've been holding back. So yes, I'm eager to get you alone and start our actual marriage." Heat flooded through her at his words and tone. "How long is appropriate?" "Another hour, maybe. Then we can slip away and nobody will fault us for it." That hour felt eternal. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they made their escape. Someone had decorated the wagon with ribbons and tin cans, traditional wedding foolishness that made both of them laugh. They drove away to cheers and shouted advice, some appropriate, some decidedly not. The ranch, when they reached it, felt different. It had always been home, but now it was their home, sanctified by vows and witnessed promises. Reeves lifted Alara from the wagon, but instead of setting her down, he carried her up the porch steps and across the threshold, making her laugh. "Traditional," he explained, finally setting her on her feet in the parlor. "Wanted to do at least one thing properly conventional." The house was quiet, peaceful. The Cowboys had been given the evening off and told to stay in the bunkhouse no matter what they heard, a detail Billy had shared with great embarrassment and greater delight. For the first time since Alara's arrival, they were truly alone. Reeves seemed suddenly uncertain, his earlier confidence faltering. "I want this to be right for you. Want to be gentle, make it good. But Alara, I'm not experienced with refinement. If I'm too rough, If I hurt you, she placed her fingers over his lips, silencing him. Reeves, I don't need refinement. I need you exactly as you are. We'll figure this out together. He kissed her then with all the passion he'd been restraining for weeks. His hands tangled in her hair, dislodging the careful pins and flowers. She clutched at his shoulders, rising on her toes to meet him with equal fervor. They stumbled toward the stairs, pausing halfway up for another kiss, then again at the top. His bedroom, their bedroom now, was simple but clean. Someone, probably Billy, had put fresh flowers in a jar on the dresser. The bed, covered in a quilt Reeves's mother had apparently made before she died, dominated the space. Nervous? Reeves asked, his hands gentle on her waist. Yes, but not afraid. Never afraid with you. What followed was tender and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. They learned each other slowly, with patience and occasional laughter when things didn't work quite right. Reeves was achingly careful, constantly checking that she was all right, that he wasn't hurting her. And Alara discovered that intimacy with someone you loved transformed what could have been merely physical into something profound. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Reeves's arm around her waist, her back pressed to his chest. The Wyoming wind rattled the windows, but inside they were warm and safe and complete. My wife, Reeves murmured against her hair. Can't quite believe you're actually my wife. Believe it. You're stuck with me now. Best kind of stuck. His arm tightened around her. Alara, thank you. For what? For staying. For fighting. For choosing this life when you had every reason to run. For making me believe in things I thought I'd lost. Hope, love, future. For being exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it. She turned in his arms to face him, studying his features in the dim light. You saved me too, you know. I had nothing in Boston, no family, no prospects, no purpose. You gave me all of that. Gave me a home, work that matters, people who respect me. And you gave me love. Honest, real love that doesn't require me to be anything other than myself. How could I not choose this? He kissed her softly. We're going to build something good here. I promise you that. This ranch will thrive. We'll have children who grow up tough and strong and loved. We'll face whatever Wyoming throws at us, and we'll survive because we're together. Together, she agreed, settling back into his embrace. That's all we need. The weeks that followed their wedding were filled with quiet joy and hard work in equal measure. Autumn was approaching, bringing with it the urgent need to prepare for Wyoming's brutal winter. Cattle had to be moved to winter pastures. Hay had to be cut and stored. Fences needed reinforcement. The house required weatherproofing against temperatures that would drop below zero. Alara threw herself into the work alongside everyone else. She'd learned to ride well enough to help move cattle, though Reeves still worried every time she mounted a horse. She could now cook meals that the cowboys praised instead of merely tolerated. She'd mastered the mysterious arts of preserving food, canning vegetables from the kitchen garden she'd started, smoking meat, making preserves that would sustain them through months when fresh food was impossible. You've become quite the frontier woman, Mrs. Patterson observed one day when Alara came to town for supplies. Hardly recognized the fancy Boston girl who arrived a few months back. That girl wouldn't have survived a week, Alara said honestly. I had to change or perish. Wyoming doesn't allow for delicate sensibilities. It's more than that. You didn't just survive, you thrived. Took what this land threw at you and came back stronger. That's rare, especially for someone from back east. The railroad, true to Judge Crawford's warning, faced serious consequences. Federal investigators arrived to examine their land acquisition practices, uncovering fraud that extended far beyond the Dalton Ranch. Marcus Hastings disappeared, rumors suggesting he'd fled to California ahead of criminal charges. Western Continental's reputation was destroyed, their expansion plans stalled indefinitely. Justice, Reeves said when word reached them. Actual justice for once, instead of big companies steamrolling over regular people. We set a precedent, Alara pointed out. Other ranchers facing similar situations now know they can fight back. What we did matters beyond just saving our own land. Our land, Reeves repeated, clearly savoring the phrase. Still getting used to that, everything being ours instead of mine. One crisp October morning, Alara woke feeling oddly different. Not sick exactly, but aware of her body in a new way. She lay quiet, analyzing the sensation while Reeves slept beside her, his face peaceful in early light. Then realization hit with stunning clarity. She was pregnant. It was too early to be certain, of course, but she knew with bone-deep conviction that they'd created a life, that a child was growing inside her. Their child. The next generation of Daltons who would inherit this land they'd fought to protect. She must have made a sound because Reeves stirred, his arm instinctively pulling her closer. "You all right?" "I think so. Actually, I think I'm better than all right." She turned to face him, seeing confusion in his sleep-heavy eyes. "Reeves, I think I'm pregnant." He went completely still, processing her words. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise. "Pregnant? You're sure?" "Not completely. It's very early, but I feel different, and I'm usually very regular, and—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "Are you happy about this?" "We never really discussed timing." He kissed her, cutting off her worried words. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed, all of that together. A baby. Our baby. His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach with wondering gentleness. Life continuing, legacy carrying forward. That's everything, Alara. Over the following weeks, subtle changes confirmed her suspicion. Mrs. Patterson, whose eyes missed nothing, took one look at Alara in the general store and smiled knowingly. "Congratulations, honey. When are you due?" "How did you—" "I've had 6 children and helped birth 24 more. I know the signs. Early summer, I'd guess." News spread through the community with typical frontier efficiency. People who'd already embraced Alara as one of their own now treated her with extra care, as if she carried something precious, which she supposed she did. The Cowboys became almost comically protective, refusing to let her lift anything heavy or work too hard. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she protested after Billy literally snatched a basket from her hands. "Boss's orders," Billy said cheerfully. "We're to make sure you don't overexert yourself. Said if anything happens to you or the baby, he'll personally throw whoever's responsible into next week." Reeves, confronted with this tale, didn't even look sheepish. "You're carrying our child. I'm allowed to be protective." "Protective is fine. Treating me like I'm made of glass is not." "Compromise," he suggested. "You can keep working, but nothing heavy, nothing dangerous, and you rest whenever you're tired. Fair?" It was impossible to stay annoyed with him when he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Fair. Winter arrived with Wyoming's characteristic violence. Temperatures plummeting, snow falling in amounts that seemed impossible, wind howling like demons around the house. But inside they were prepared. The house had been weatherproofed. Food stores were ample. Firewood was stacked high. And most importantly, they had each other. During the long winter nights, they talked about the future. Names for the baby, traditional family names like James for a boy, Sarah after Reeves's mother for a girl. Plans for expanding the house once the child came. Dreams of teaching their son or daughter to ride, to appreciate Wyoming's harsh beauty, to understand the value of hard work and honest dealing. "I want our child to have opportunities," Alara said one evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Education, books, culture, but also to know this land, to respect it." "Both," Reeves agreed. "We'll raise someone tough enough to thrive here, but educated enough to understand the wider world. Best of what we both bring to this." Spring came eventually, as it always did. Snow melted, revealing land reborn. Wildflowers carpeted the prairie in colors that seemed impossible after months of white and gray. Cattle that had survived the winter grew fat on new grass. And Alara's pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling with undeniable life. She worked alongside everyone through the spring tasks, planting the expanded kitchen garden, helping with the new calves, overseeing repairs to buildings that had weathered the winter. Reeves hovered, perpetually worried, but had learned not to smother her completely. "You're enjoying this," she accused one afternoon, catching him watching her plant seeds with a soft expression. "Enjoying what?" "Seeing me settled here, pregnant and planting vegetables, thoroughly domesticated." "Domesticated?" He laughed outright. "Alara, you demolished a railroad company in court, learn to ride and shoot, and routinely argue with me about ranch management. You're about as domesticated as Wyoming herself. Beautiful, occasionally gentle, but fundamentally wild and untamable. That's what I love about you. In late May, as cottonwood trees burst into full leaf and the land shimmered with life, Alara went into labor. It started as mild cramping she initially dismissed, then progressed with frightening speed into pain that took her breath away. Mrs. Patterson, who'd installed herself at the ranch 2 weeks prior just in case, took command with calm efficiency. "Reeves, get out. This is women's work and you'll just be in the way. Billy, ride to town and fetch Doc Morrison. He should be here just in case, though I've delivered plenty of babies without doctors. Sam, make sure there's plenty of hot water. The rest of you, stay out of the way and pray." Reeves looked torn between obedience and desperate need to stay with his wife. Alara, between contractions, managed to squeeze his hand. "Go. Let Mrs. Patterson work. I'll be fine." "You'd better be," he said roughly. "Can't lose you, Alara. Can't." "You won't." She tried to smile. "I'm too stubborn to die in childbirth. Now go. Let me do this." Labor was harder than anything Alara had experienced, harder than adjusting to frontier life, harder than the desperate ride to Cheyenne, harder than facing down the railroad in court. Pain came in waves that seemed endless. She lost track of time, aware only of Mrs. Patterson's steady voice coaching her through, of her own body working toward a goal it instinctively understood. "Almost there," Mrs. Patterson encouraged. "One more good push, honey. Your baby's almost here." Alara gathered every ounce of strength she possessed and pushed with desperate determination. A cry split the air, not her own, but new life announcing itself to the world. "It's a girl!" Mrs. Patterson's voice was jubilant. "A healthy baby girl, perfect in every way." They placed the baby on Alara's chest, tiny, wrinkled, impossibly precious. Dark hair plastered to her skull, eyes squinted shut against the brightness, lungs protesting the indignity of birth with impressive volume. Alara felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. "Hello," she whispered, running a gentle finger along the baby's cheek. "Hello, little one. Welcome to Wyoming." Someone, Billy, probably, must have told Reeves because he burst through the door despite Mrs. Patterson's protests. He stopped short at the sight of Alara holding their daughter, his expression cycling through relief, wonder, and overwhelming love. "She's perfect," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping aside to let him closer. Both of them came through beautifully. Reeves moved to the bedside like he was approaching something sacred. When he looked at Alara, tears tracked openly down his face. "You're all right? Both of you?" "We're perfect." Alara shifted the baby so he could see better. "Meet your daughter." He reached out with one finger, touching the tiny hand that immediately gripped him with surprising strength. "She's so small, so perfect. I didn't understand what this would feel like." "What does it feel like?" "Like everything I've been protecting suddenly makes sense. Like all the fighting and struggling and sacrifice was preparing me for this moment." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm around Alara's shoulders, both of them studying their daughter with reverent wonder. "What should we name her?" "Sarah," Alara said immediately. "After your mother. She should know where she comes from, whose legacy she carries." "Sarah Dalton." He said it slowly, testing the sound. "It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect. I don't have words for this, Alara." "You don't need words. This says everything." That evening, with the baby sleeping peacefully in a cradle Reeves and the Cowboys had built months ago, the new parents sat on the porch watching sunset paint the sky in familiar glory. Alara was exhausted but content, her body sore but healing, her heart fuller than she'd known was possible. "Thinking about the day I arrived," she said softly, "how terrified I was, how lost. If someone had told me then that I'd be sitting here married to you, with our baby sleeping inside, completely happy in Wyoming, I wouldn't have believed them." "Life's strange," Reeves agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "I was barely surviving when you showed up, going through motions, trying to hold things together through sheer stubbornness. You changed everything, gave me reasons beyond duty to keep fighting. We saved each other." Alara said. You gave me home and purpose. I gave you partnership and hope. And together we created something neither of us could have built alone. Inside, Sarah made a small noise, and both parents immediately tensed, listening, but she settled back into sleep, allowing them this moment. My father used to tell me that a man's legacy isn't measured in land or money, Reeves said quietly. It's measured in what he leaves behind, family, community, the changes he makes in the world around him. I understand that now, in ways I couldn't before. This ranch, Sarah, the life we're building, that's legacy. That's everything that matters. Your father would be proud, Alara said. Both your fathers, yours and mine. We honored their memories by building something good from tragedy. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began emerging. The land stretched before them, harsh, beautiful, unforgiving, magnificent. Their land now, secured through struggle, to be passed to their daughter and whatever siblings might follow. A legacy built on sacrifice and determination and love that had survived every test. I expected a gentleman, Alara said eventually, echoing thoughts from that first terrible day. I got a rugged cowboy instead. Disappointed? There was humor in his voice, but also genuine curiosity. Grateful, she corrected. A gentleman would have given me pretty words and comfortable lies. You gave me honesty and partnership and real love. That's infinitely better. Reeves pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Life didn't give me what I expected either. It gave me something better. A woman strong enough to match me, stubborn enough to stay when things got hard, brave enough to build a life in a place that chews up the weak. It gave me you. It gave us each other, Alara amended. And that was exactly what we both needed, even if we didn't know it at the time. The Wyoming wind rose, carrying scents of grass and wildflowers, and the promise of summer. Inside their house, truly a home now, filled with laughter and love and new life, their daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the struggles that had brought her into being. She would grow up knowing this land, these rhythms, this way of life. She would be tough and gentle, educated and practical, a true child of Wyoming. And on the porch, where everything had slowly transformed from hostility to friendship to deep love, Reeves and Alara Dalton held each other close and watched their land glow in the fading light. They'd survived everything Wyoming could throw at them. They'd built something strong enough to weather any storm. And they'd created a future bright with possibility. The mail-order bride who'd expected civilization had found something far more valuable in the wild heart of Wyoming, a partnership of equals, honest love, and a home worth fighting for. The rugged cowboy who'd expected nothing but continued struggle had discovered that sometimes life's greatest gifts came disguised as disasters. Together, they were complete. Together, they were home. And that was everything they needed. The story of how they found each other would be told and retold in Broken Creek for generations. The Boston lady and the Wyoming cowboy, the railroad battle, the love that grew from impossible circumstances. But for Reeves and Alara, the story was simpler. Two wounded people had found healing in each other. Two lost souls had found purpose together. Two hearts had recognized their match despite every reason they shouldn't. In the end, that was all any love story needed to be.